Representative Sherwood.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Representative Wanitzer.
Here.
Co-Chairman Nethercott. Chairman Nicholas. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
I can never remember, Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, whether the green light means go or red. Ours says red. But it is truly good to be here, members of the committee, and it is an honor to fulfill my constitutional duty to submit a balanced budget for the upcoming biennium. As you know, Wyoming has not had a couple of years that have been easy. We have done a lot to strengthen our state and prepare ourselves for what could be a few challenging years ahead. But we have done so in a time of uncertain revenues and volatility. Preparing this budget was not easy, and I want to express my gratitude to all those who have had a hand in preparing what is a practical, balanced, conservative, and prudent budget. My thanks go out to a dedicated and resourceful cabinet and staff. This year, I'm joined by Chief of Staff Drew Perkins. I also want to thank especially Director of the Budget Department, Kevin Hibbard, Policy Director Rennie McKay, Budget Policy Advisor Erica Legursky, Tim Sheehan, Interim Director of ETS, Tricia Bach, A&I Director, just to name a few. Over the next 17 days of hearings, I'm confident you will have constructive conversations with many of them. But before you do, I just wanted to express my appreciation for the way you conduct those conversations in the spirit of what makes Wyoming such a remarkable state. The relations between our two branches enjoy candor, respect, and an unwavering commitment to making Wyoming a better place for our time leading her. Thank you for the time you have already spent studying this budget and preparing to put your own conservative and thoughtful imprimatur in this budget. I also want to especially thank LSO and most especially Don Richards for their diligence in looking at this budget. Here in Wyoming, the seasons are changing, and there is an incredibly exciting future that we can look to. But there's still some hard weather ahead before spring is fully here. My budget proposal is built around 5 themes: inflation and property tax relief for the truly needy, fighting back against an aggressive and imperialistic federal government, bringing our fiscal house safely back to earth as the federal tornado of funding subsides, constructively addressing the workforce shortages all employers are facing while improving the opportunities for all Wyoming workers, and really finally getting a handle on our unacceptably high suicide rate. There are, of course, other important issues from education and school construction to tourism and invasive species that will also require our attention. But Wyoming is making strides. Our economy is the most diverse it has been in years. We are seeing business expansion and new businesses coming to our state. We are making headway on energy, wildlife management, despite significant headwinds from the west and the east. Nevertheless, as we see copious federal spending coming to an end, funding that has shorn up many of our programs that Wyoming was able to keep afloat during an economic downturn of COVID, we must carefully evaluate how essential these programs are, as well as whether we can afford them. In many cases, these programs offer much needed resources to some of our most vulnerable. It is not easy to have to reduce programs, especially those providing critical services that are needed by so many. And yet, that is what circumstances in 2020, you will remember, compelled us to do. Unfortunately, some of what we had to consider then is still present today. In this budget, you will see where programs you were able to fund with one-time dollars remain at risk. Know that we considered carefully the ramifications of every cut We took a hard look at every aspect of this budget, focused on how to provide the best service, retain the best staff, foster the best business climate, and lessen the burden on our citizens. Still, as you know, there are larger agencies and smaller ones. Cuts affect each differently, and some agencies can weather cuts less painfully than others. Nonetheless, the majority of our spending resides in relatively few outsized agencies, such as our Department of Health and Department of Corrections. So if I'm asked why these larger agencies sustained the cuts that I have recommended, I would answer the way John Dillinger did when he is asked why he robbed banks, because that's where the money is. Growing up on the ranch, I was taught to do the best I could with what I had and to do my part to leave things better than when I found it, from returning borrowed equipment in better condition after we used it, to making sure branding crews were well fed. We sought to express our gratitude while retaining our commitment to be frugal, to save for future generations, but also to make good investments that would yield returns for decades to come. That is what Wyoming has sought to do over the past few years. This budget is cast in the light of those attitudes. Even though Wyoming has never been able to confidently predict her future revenues, we have been careful. Now, when we find our country at something of an inflection point, our predictions have become even more difficult. First, in 2016, when I was serving as treasurer, and then in 2020, the state suffered her two biggest losses in income. In 2020, that resulted in about a third of our income being lost. We understand the lessons we were taught in those years, and thus grasp the fact that a realistic and conservative approach to budgeting means Wyoming must strive to prepare for a future that could well see declining revenues and continued inflationary pressures despite all our efforts to the contrary. That is why this budget recommends significant savings, leaving capacity available to meet future needs and challenges. It is disciplined, businesslike, and forward-thinking. It focuses on needs and not wants, but it recognizes the pressing challenges of today: an unchecked federal government bent on usurping state authority, sovereignty, workforce shortages, inflation, an unacceptably high suicide rate, and property tax relief for the truly needy. The supplemental budget we crafted last year was historic, setting aside nearly $1.5 billion in savings. Much of that went to permanent savings, the earnings from which every Wyoming citizen benefits, helping to keep taxes in Wyoming low for years to come. Earnings from these funds amount to about $1,400 per citizen in a biennium. This year, I propose adding $265 million in the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, increasing the size of the Rainy Day Fund to $1.6 billion, and adding $265 million to the Common School Permanent Land Fund. We cannot yet know how drastic the implications of the Biden administration's regulations on mineral leasing, air quality, land use will be, and will they compromise our revenues. But we can be assured, without relief, they will have a detrimental effect. Even after these prudent savings, there remains more than $48.9 million available for the legislature to appropriate as necessary. After peaking at 10%, Wyoming's inflation rate is finally abating slightly. Bear in mind, though, the average citizen is still feeling acutely the sting of inflation, which seems still to be out of control, despite statistics to the contrary. It is a perspective that we must respect. The 2023 second quarter Wyoming Cost of Living Index stands at 4.6%. Housing inflation is up 6.1% from a year earlier. Many, if not most, Wyoming people have experienced property tax bills that have gone up significantly over the last 3 years. Some counties have seen assessed valuations rise much more than others, but almost everywhere in our state, local taxes have gone up. The rise has been particularly hard on those living on fixed incomes who have owned their homes for many years. I thank the legislators for supporting the property tax relief program that we established last year. The program provided targeted relief to those who most needed it, and it did so without compromising a county's ability to meet the needs of its citizens and schools. The Department of Revenue distributed $8.3 million to nearly 9,000 households. By all accounts, the program worked well, though it needed more resource. In this budget, I propose expanding that program for the full biennium by adding $20 million to the Department of Revenue to help provide relief over the next 2 years to those struggling to stay in their homes. I also look forward to working with legislators on a wise, sustainable, and forward-looking approach to property tax relief in statute. No matter how we approach this important question, though, we must be doggedly thoughtful to avoid unintended adverse consequences. As a conservative, I understand I need to pay for the services I require. Yet, I am grateful to live in Wyoming, where taxes on mineral production defray much of our citizens' tax burdens. Nevertheless, I have no use for frivolous expenditures. Wyoming gets it mostly right, despite the fact that we all benefit from sanctioned wealth transfer taxes on our mineral production. The American Rescue Plan package of $1.9 trillion gave money directly to all Americans and also provided funds for the state, counties, and municipalities. Unprecedented in scope, but also an unusual burden on our grandchildren. Nonetheless, Wyoming worked hard to make the best use of those funds by investing in Wyoming's future. And I thank each of you for taking that view as well. Of the more than $1 billion in state of Wyoming, the $1 billion the state of Wyoming received, most of the funds are obligated, encumbered, or spent. Now, though, we must look to how to replace ARPA federal funds where necessary with our own dollars. This accounts for $323,931,332 in general funds, most of which is in the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health. Unhappily, as I mentioned before, this Biden administration has taken some dead aim at the very industries that have built Wyoming, specifically our fossil fuel industries. Ironically, the policies of this administration that they have established to limit mineral production domestically has resulted in higher near-term commodity prices for our coal, oil, and natural gas. Happily, for the time being, this situation has resulted in state revenues coming in a little bit higher than expected through the past 2 years. These conditions may continue for a while, allowing prices to remain positive, which would allow us to avoid the need for larger cuts and possibly some freeboard to address increasing costs elsewhere. Still, it is important to bear in mind commodity prices can be volatile and surprises are painful. Over the past few years, we have learned that cutting items is not altogether a simple matter. As an example, in order to keep services provided by the Department of Health at the level they are today in the upcoming biennium, while also responding to mandatory funding requirements, Wyoming would have been required to spend approximately $110 million in general funds in the next biennium. In the biennium we are in, partnering with the legislature, we were able to use $80 million of one-time federal matching funds to avoid having to make many of the very severe cuts which would have impacted our senior citizens, long-term care facilities, mental health services, and people with developmental disabilities. We do not enjoy the same opportunities today as we experience the waning of federal ARPA, CARES, and other funds. This budget proposal reappraised these services and tries to offer sustainable options to fund key areas that were supported by both chambers of the legislature in the 2023-24 budget. What is given can be taken away, and I need not tell you that the federal government remains one of the most pressing adversaries at this time. The Biden administration's policies are holding back Wyoming's most profitable industries like oil, gas, and coal, industries that have done much to fund our schools, our programs, and our abilities to meet the needs of Wyoming citizens. The political climate in Washington means we cannot anticipate much help from Congress in checking an executive that seemingly acts with relative impunity to throttle those very industries that are core to our economy. So we cannot afford to be timid when protecting Wyoming's interests. And on that score, we have had a very successful year in defending our interests in the courts. I propose using resources available to us today to ensure that we can continue to defend Wyoming's concerns in court and to proactively manage our affairs. My budget increases spending authority for the Federal Natural Resource Planning Account for NERPA by $1 million. These funds showed their value this year when we were able to quickly deploy them when the Bureau of Land Management dropped a disquieting preferred alternative unexpectedly for the Rock Springs Draft Resource Management Plan. Wyoming is also facing what can easily be termed as an onslaught of federal rulemaking, especially by the Environmental Protection Agency. These rules for power plants, water users, and other industries can be crippling at worst and Byzantine at best. I propose fortifying the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality with staff and contracting resources to maintain primacy when possible, support industries navigating new rules, and support the agency's efforts to write and implement changes to rules and regulations to best reflect our state's position and unique circumstances. This overall proposal of $3.4 million at DEQ is necessary for Wyoming to control her own destiny in the current environment of federal activism. Even with these increases, our DEQ remains lean in staff, maintains its effectiveness, and it can improve permit application turnaround times. Similarly, Wyoming is also faced with a never-before-seen circumstance of electric utilities proposing rate increases in new structures to produce and transmit power. As Wyoming exports approximately 80% of its power produced, policies in other states and by utilities elsewhere have an outsized influence on our communities. In effect, consumer states with ambitions for 100% renewable portfolios or net zero carbon emissions have established policies which victimize Wyoming citizens with higher rate requests and opaque supply trajectories. One of the best tools we have to protect Wyoming ratepayers, families, and businesses is our own Office of Consumer Advocate. I propose adding approximately $695,000 to the Office of Consumer Advocate, OCA, to focus on bolstering Wyoming's expertise and ability to represent her people in cases before the Public Service Commission. Because these cases can have life-changing impacts on those living on fixed incomes, and can negate Wyoming's competitive advantage of providing low-cost power to businesses, the crucial work of the OCA is needed. We need to be able to defend our citizens' right to affordable, reliable, and dispatchable power against unrealistic policies and taxes levied locally, but paid universally across the entire grid. Wyoming is home to nationally prominent infrastructure, from our nuclear, Air Force Base, gas and oil pipelines, fiber optic corridors, and the most used interstate highways and rail lines. Understanding the threats, both physical and cyber, to that infrastructure requires intelligent work and proactive planning. That is why I propose $4.6 million to better secure and defend critical infrastructure. Our state government must be properly resourced to assure our ability to defend our interests in whatever venue threats may appear. Similarly, this is no time to put our heads in the sand and ignore market and regulatory forces changing the landscape for our energy industry and the families that work in Wyoming. I greatly appreciate that the legislature has stood behind me in consistent efforts to support our coal, oil, and gas sectors by providing funding for energy-related projects. I see innovation allowing us to reduce emissions while also enabling us to provide reliable and affordable energy, which I believe can best be achieved through the continued use of fossil fuels. That is why I asked for an extension of the governor's energy matching fund program. Additionally, we continue to lead on using and storing carbon dioxide so that our coal mines can keep producing and supplying reliable, dependable power to consumers not only in Wyoming, but in the 26 other states that depend on our state. I launched the Wyoming Innovation Partnership to identify efficiencies and improve coordination to support economic development with an ambitious workforce. This year, I am proposing $30 million to move that initiative into its next chapter. The work we began there to make sure the resources we spend on these initiatives actually return in measurable ways to Wyoming, that our system responds to needs as they emerge, and that those responses remain relevant. These ways of examining and evaluating the fruits of our education expenditures need to become part of how we consider future appropriations to post-secondary education. I recognize this initiative must be sustainable and cannot rely only on state funding, and I am proud of the trajectory that WIP is on and its accomplishments to date. The investments made thus far are making a real impact for Wyoming citizens who want to stay in Wyoming and fill the primary jobs so critical to our state's future. Investments in education always do take time to appreciate. There is a lag between funding, implementation, and the results yielded. I have provided you with information on one program which has already yielded results, both with workers getting jobs here in Wyoming, but also as the program has been able to wean itself off the state funding and become privately resourced. As we look to help businesses grow and fill more jobs with qualified workers, WIP is only one tool. The Wyoming Department of Workforce Services is approaching workforce development from all angles. And here again, I want to thank the legislature for their vision in looking at these programs. My exception request contains those proposals to bolster businesses and workers. As we look to tomorrow and how to support innovation in our core industries and attract new investments to Wyoming, I am supporting the University of Wyoming Artificial Intelligence Initiative. This is focused on research to prepare Wyoming for the growth of AI, to help us develop policies to protect people and businesses, and also to lead research in oil, gas, mining, agriculture, water use, renewables, and engineering to attract corporate partners that want to invest in Wyoming and in UW. While the university is key to realizing our economic ambitions, so is expanding the supply of workforce housing. This is an issue that we have all wrestled with for the last several years. I propose that we address the housing shortage in two ways. First, we have found that Wyoming has overregulated housing development, and our market is, in fact, inelastic, meaning when homes are built, the costs of housing keep rising despite supply. A properly functioning market would see more houses priced more affordably. However, deregulation alone cannot fix this problem. Our extremely low property taxes, city, towns, and counties do not have enough funding to build arterial infrastructure like sewer, water, streets, and other utilities to encourage new housing development. The vast majority of spending on this type of infrastructure is done to do maintenance on old and failing systems. That is why I'm proposing that we support $25 million in matching funds for the state revolving fund for clean and drinking water projects. For too long, Wyoming has put off the challenging work of better addressing its mental health crisis, but we are now making positive strides. While Wyoming has had an unacceptably high suicide rate for decades, the work we have begun is making a difference for family and for citizens. We still rank among the highest states for suicide, but we are no longer the worst. It is a small but an important and positive step. 2022 saw more individuals in crisis than any other recorded year, as demonstrated by the 5,181 calls that came into the 988 hotline. But the good news is that only 2% of these calls required an emergency activation, either police or EMTs. The others were de-escalated and assisted over the phone. Now a Wyoming phone with a real person who knows where Yoder, Lynch, Matizzi is on the other side of the line. We are making progress, and it is essential we prioritize the package of mental health funding in my budget. This includes maintaining the funding for our community mental health centers so that the most in need have quality services. It also means that building out the program that you all started to look at these community health centers has a chance to succeed. We all have worked very hard to reform our current system through 2021 House Enrolled Act 56, and this funding will ensure that this effort moves forward. Lastly, I ask you to join me in supporting the efforts to expand the 988 suicide prevention hotline capacities and add text and chat services. We need to ensure all methods of communication are available to those at risk of suicide so that no matter of the communication preference, someone is available to support them in their greatest time of need. As I said, the early signs show promise that we are making a difference, and this is the time to persevere and save lives. My mental health funding package keeps Wyoming truly focused on the well-being of our residents now and into the future. In summary, Wyoming has made great strides over the past couple of years despite significant headwinds. Our outdoor recreation economy has grown. Tourism is booming. We have seen new businesses move into our state even as others are looking to expand. Our agricultural sector is recovering from severe drought, and our mineral sector remains resilient and poised to see new growth as our demands of domestically sourced energy and materials expands. We have responded by clearing pathways for business expansion, workforce education, and reskilling, while also making great strides at conserving those things that make living in Wyoming so rewarding. Open space, unmatched opportunities to hunt, fish, and just enjoy our great outdoors. We are invested in a quality education system and in preserving the freedoms Americans value. We have an extraordinary chance to make things better for our time being here. The calf pictured on the cover of this budget book represents, in my mind, the optimism that we have for our future. We must care for it, nurture it, make sure that it's protected from the elements and from the coyotes that may come to try to grab it. We want to make sure that that future has the best chance that it can. I appreciate your consideration of this budget proposal. It is disciplined, businesslike, and forward-thinking. I thank you for your time. I'm available now for questions, or I can turn it over to my cabinet and staff to take questions as you work through the agency budget proposals. And I thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Governor. Questions? Any questions? Somebody's got it. Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, Governor, thank you so much for your comments and especially your focus on housing in Wyoming and the regulatory barriers to housing. One of the regulatory barriers to housing development can be if a residential neighborhood finds itself in a federally designated floodplain. Does it make sense to you that state funds could or should be devoted to getting such residential neighborhoods out of federally designated floodplains?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, Representative Stith, I am aware of the situation you're talking about, and I think that we should do everything we can to try to figure out how to resolve that issue. I know it's been ongoing for probably more than a decade, and so yes, would love to work with you on some of those.
We've never heard that question before. Representative Larson.
Sad.
Morning, Governor. Just curious on your thoughts. We worked together on your energy matching funds. We're seeing a little bit of how those are being used. Are you pleased with the way that that's going? You're asking us to move forward on that a little bit and extend those funds. And so you can just kind of give us some insight to what your office has been doing and maybe some of the projects that you see on the horizon that might benefit from the use of those that in return would benefit the state? I'd be interested in hearing some of those.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, Representative Larson. Thank you for the question. I have to say, I think the program is now reaching some maturity, and I think it has been able to make some pretty wise choices about how those funds are being used. Just to give you some idea of where the funding has been put on infrastructure, we've used Section 321C earmark funds to move the Bishop Road in Campbell County, $5 million. Campbell County T7 move, also $1.466 million. So roughly $6,466,000 have been used, leaving a balance for road moving around $3,533,000. The regular projects that we've talked about, School of Energy Resources, Frontier Carbon Solutions, the CO2 sequestration hub. We spent about $9,135,000. I believe that project is making big strides. BWXT, Advanced Technologies, a microreactor that's moving into southwestern Wyoming from Virginia, 1.685. This is really an exciting business case. I think many of you are familiar with it, but for those who are not, these are small reactors that can be used in remote locations and can do things from powering small mining operations to what I found particularly compelling were communities in Alaska that otherwise would depend on fuel transport. Some of the projects that are pending review and coming close to fruition, Black Hills Viaduct, Bright Loop, coal to hydrogen. The request is for $15,995,000. Cowboy Clean Fuels, CBM enhancements, coal bed methane enhancements, $7,792,000. Flow State Solutions, hydrogen pipeline monitoring and methane leak detection, $2 million. Membrane Technology Research, the facility that is being built next to Dry Fork, has the request is for $8 million. UWSER, using produced water from conventional oil and gas to convert to hydrogen, about $2,750,000. Williams Companies, Echo Springs carbon capture study, about $1 million there. And so all of these projects, I think, are moving our energy sector forward and continuing to advance Wyoming as a leader on energy and climate and carbon solutions. Thank you.
Senator Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Governor. Quick question. I so appreciate your comments with regard to helping those on fixed incomes with regard to the property tax issue. I had a town hall meeting on Saturday, and that was the #1 issue. Do you have any thoughts beyond the referendum issue? Do you have any thoughts on individual attempts coming during the budget session that might affect your state budget with regard to property tax relief or property tax reform?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, Senator Salazar, thank you for that question. We will look carefully at all of the proposals that the legislature puts forward, as well as what else might come. I think it's important to recognize that property tax is really a county issue more than a state issue. And so in as much as funding affects the county's ability to meet the obligations that citizens expect, it most likely will have a bearing on how this state plans to backfill those costs. And that, I think, Senator, is my largest concern, is that we understand where those tax dollars are going to come from, that refill the coffers that might otherwise not have the benefit of of taxation. If, assuming everybody wants to do the right thing, and we find a level that we can come to that's reasonable.
And just to follow up on that, Governor, under the referendum, preliminary analysis had the impact of that being over 200 million deduction in funding for schools over the biennium, and 60 million taking out of the directly out of the pockets of cities, towns, and counties. Right now, Wyoming has the lowest property tax of any state in the United States. There is a suggestion that Colorado and Idaho or Hawaii are lower, but they have special use taxes and other taxes that basically perform the same basis. So if all in, we are by far the lowest of any state, even with our inflationary values of our home properties. And as you mentioned in your statement, just that we have extremely low property taxes. So the question is, where would the money come from if that initiative passes to supplant funding for education, which we all know within 5 or 6 years starts to head underwater?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, thank you for that question. I think the issue you raise is something that we would have to wrestle with. Absolutely. I think if we want to keep the same level of services, and we have the obligation that we do to fund education the way that has been established by court action over the last couple of years, we would have to look for different sources of revenue, cut government services. Those are all challenging sets of circumstances. I think our mineral sector already pays an outsized proportion of taxes. We all benefit. I think it's been referred to, we're all trust fund babies to a degree. So I would say that I would not be in favor of raising severance taxes and further burdening an industry that is already struggling.
So Governor, and I hate to, and I'm not trying to surprise you here with anything, but as your office has contemplated, and I know that we're all worried about this property tax issue, but as we look about backfilling local, the traditional, where the traditional sources of property tax go to locals and to schools, and we start backfilling that with state general fund, is there concern there then that there's misrepresentation on taxation because you will have perhaps citizens in my county, you vote for all of these property taxes for whatever districts it may be, and now the state's going to backfill them and the rest of the state hasn't had an opportunity to vote on that taxation. And so then we get into this inequity in not having representation on how these tax dollars are going to be spent. We're just going to backfill them from the state general fund. Does that not complicate this issue somewhat?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, Representative Larson, I would agree with you. You know, as a Wyoming citizen and a Republican and a conservative, I've always felt that I should have the ability to vote on the taxes that are levied on me. And so when it comes to things like a senior district, senior services district in Johnson County, or a rec district, those are things that the voters of Johnson County have a chance to vote on. And they have defeated many of those initiatives when they've been too vague, when they've been broad, when they haven't been targeted. And I think that's one of the great things in our country with local representation. When we count on the resources of the state to backfill programs, I think the temptation to be a little more profligate is always there. That to arguably is some of the issue we're facing now with the federal government that has put us in a remarkable situation. So to answer your question, I think it does complicate matters. I think it probably leads to perhaps less responsibility on the part of policymakers.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good to see you this morning, Governor. As we are still seeing significant vacancies in our state agencies, certain state agencies. Could you share with us your vision on how to attract and retain our hardworking state employees? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Co-Chairman, and Representative Sherwood, thank you. It is true that we have been working hard to fill vacancies. The work we did in phase one and phase two over the last couple of years has made a difference. As you make adjustments in compensation, there are always some unintended consequences that happen. We were able to look at some of the analysis, and I'm sure you'll have a chance to talk to Director Bach about this, but we were able to look at some of the agencies where we were looking at what our compensation package should look like really wasn't market, and we had to change and add to that. Those kinds of things also create compression, which is also a concern. And as I've mentioned several times over my time as governor, one of the best things we have is the experience and really qualified individuals that we have on board. And so we want to make sure that we're able to retain quality and experience. And then what I will say is that we have seen some, and Director Bach can probably speak a little more accurately to this, but we have seen positive moves in being able to fill vacancies. Having said that, we still have some work to do. You'll note that our compensation phase 3 takes place in the second year of the biennium, and that's to allow us some time to calibrate. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay. Governor, thank you very much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
Your work, your services, and
Thank you for your
My pleasure.
service. And it is always a pleasure to work with you, and I look forward to this coming budget session. Thank you. You want to borrow that? Anything else you want? Well,
all right. Chief,
Mr. Chairman?
the
Madam
helm is
Chairman?
yours. Yeah.
Well, thank you. You know, one of the things I just wanted to follow up with is, if we go back just a couple of, in round one, this is going back to the energy matching grants, just to give you a couple of big picture numbers. Our energy matching grant fund in round one was the state contribution that was about 19.1 million. And the federal and private capital match to those things is 62.2 million. So really, it's a little bit better than 3 to 1. For every dollar that we invested in, the state invested in energy matching grants, we got $3. We got $3 either from the federal government or from private equity into those same things. As we look at moving into what's round two and the things that we've got that are pending now and that we're working through and looking at in round two, we were looking at about 164, almost $165 million of new investment, of which 37.5 million would be energy matching funds. We're looking at about $127 million of private or federal fund matches in those areas. So again, you start to see that almost climb to closer to 4 to 1. So the plan and the desire to have those things in that program are being realized every day.
So just to follow up on that, the source of the 37.5 million, is that broken out, or is that just the direct? And is it part of the 150 million? Is it part? Yeah, that's what I just want to clarify.
Right. That would, yeah. So this is taking to the first round, and then we're working on the second round now. Most of that's now the administration of that program is now over in the Wyoming Energy Authority. And his folks over there are reviewing those and doing that. Those are kind of what we're looking at in the second round. Those awards haven't all been made, but that's kind of what we're kind of anticipating in the second round.
And then in terms of the third round, I know you have things on the horizon. So I just want to So if you've got roughly 100 million left in the bucket, what ideas or possibilities are out there for that? And how soon will we know? The question is, I mean, is that something we need to appropriate or put strictures on for now? How long do you want to have it sit in the bucket, that time of thing?
Well, I think that, I mean, if you remember, there's a couple things. We, we were anticipating building some funds for Hydrogen Hub and some other things like that. Obviously, we're successful on Hydrogen Hub. We've been, obviously the CCUS moves forward. And there continue to be a number of opportunities to do that. I think you'll hear about some of those you've heard. I know that we've talked with yourself and some other members on this committee, as well as President Driscoll and others, about other opportunities that are out there. Folks wanting to come in and do some things. So there's money available for those things. There's continued work that can be done over at High Bay, at the School of Energy Resources. Those folks are working diligently and having tremendous success. What Dr. Krupke and folks have done at the School of Energy Resources and attracting federal grants has been really significant. I mean, substantial amounts. She's doing exactly what the legislature and the governor tasked her to do, and doing a great job. And then also you've got Dr. Peary at the High Bay, as he's doing exactly what he was doing. He's attracting private capital from all around the world. And still being able to try and make those things. And I think it's been helpful as we've been able to focus him and focus some of the requirements on the contributions that we make when we make those things, to make sure that they have Wyoming application. And so, for example, I believe that he's in the process. I think they probably have been awarded either 3 or 4 grants in this first phase of the 25 million on the porous media and the ability to tertiary recovery, enhanced tertiary recovery. Those have gone out, and he was looking to 3 or 4. I think they have now been or are just right on the verge of being awarded. Those will all be in Wyoming oil fields with folks that are either Wyoming oil companies or companies that are doing business in Wyoming, in these Wyoming fields. So we'll be able to start to have data back on the first phase of that here very soon. And so there's a second phase there. I think that, so there continues to be and will continue to be many opportunities to deploy this money and attract both top quality research and also applied research, scalable research that we can translate directly into economic benefits for Wyoming and her industries. Sure.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Mr. Chairman, I think just in terms of raw numbers, the round 2 application that closed, there was more than $100 million in applications. And so the 37 was the recommendations from the governor's group that reviews the applications. So the demand was very high for round 2. I think there's a great group reviewing those applications to bring the best forward. And again, you're then tripling or quadrupling that investment in Wyoming energy industries. And we're talking about investments that build up our coal industry, our oil, our natural gas industry, uranium industry, and also look at renewables. So there's some really great opportunity. And so in terms of raw dollars, in terms of what you're saying, the demand for this month was more than $100 million. And there's more attention to Wyoming and our energy industry and our ability to lead and innovate. Grew Sunday night, if you heard a few things from national TV coverage, governor is out talking about Wyoming leading, and the energy industry around the globe is hearing that, and they want to come here and work on that and invest. So the number of calls that the chiefs received, I received, and the Energy Authority have all received since Sunday night is pretty remarkable. So this program, people know about this program and see the ability for Wyoming to lead and for us to grow our energy industry and bring jobs here. So I think this is a pretty amazing opportunity over the next couple of years.
And just to follow up on that, my understanding was there might be some modifications or on the current restrictions or limitations on those dollars, or what can be used, they can be used for. So if you have that as we proceed, just let us know. So. Okay, please proceed.
Well, I guess we'll jump into Agency 1. We've had a I think just in the year I've been here, just finished my first year as chief. It's just, I got to tell you, I just really appreciate our governor and I really appreciate our staff. We have a staff that works incredibly hard, and the youth and enthusiasm in the staff has kind of renewed my faith in the next generation to take over and move Wyoming forward. We just have some really outstanding young people working there. Mr. Chairman, with your, if you would, I think maybe the most efficient way to do this, if we go to, in our budget book on page 16, if we go down through our exception requests, I would do that. I think that our office continues to be, just as a general comment, our office continues to be very, very engaged in any number of things. We have our staff, our policy staff is working incredibly hard. We have it divided up well. We're all over the place doing all kinds of things, sometimes a little too many things, but we love our work and are excited to work for the state of Wyoming. If that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I'll start down through our exception requests, unless you want me to proceed a different way.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you. So the first one you have down there, the governor spoke a little bit about that, is the FNRP spending authority. And so we'd like to, one of the first exception requests is add $1 million to the FNRP account, leaving what's in there as we continue to find out. It's just amazing as we talk about the federal onslaught of regulation. It's not just, it's in energy, it's in land use, it's in air quality, it's in water quality. We find that coming out, not just in, we call it rule and regulation, but now it's coming out in guidance, which is even a little bit more insidious, I guess I would be the right term, because you don't have the ability to challenge it or the review or the comment that you have in rulemaking. And so having both the spending authority to ability to litigate those things, to do baseline assessments, to hire expertise, so that we have the ability to come back with data that reflects really the expertise in management that Wyoming has exhibited over the last number of decades, as compared to the folks in Washington D.C. who always seem to have a better way to do it, having maybe never having even been here. So with that, then I think then the 525, the next one, party two, is come back and increase and rebuild the special contingency emergency response amounts.
So Chief, as you do this, because we're working from the exception request list, if you could direct us to a page number, because some folks have their notes by section.
Sure.
Or by unit. And so if we just have a page number, or Don, if you don't have that, we can have.
I will work on that. What we can do is it's not that hard. It takes a little bit of flipping. The first one is for NERPA is in unit 2401, which you would find back on.
What is that?
101, 109.
Okay.
Then the next one, the increased response is section 601. You find section 601 on, what is it? Page 52. And again, the special emergency contingency responses, everything from an ambulance that ran off the road in Lusk to and repairing that, or was crashed into in Lusk, to water tanks or other things, just or any kind of emergency that may happen. There's a consistent, and usually these come out of one kind of local government or another. They generally have those go. Sometimes they also can augment state services, but most of the time they're usually augment local emergency services.
And so our typically in the past, we've funded that roughly at a $20 million balance. Is that?
That's a little bit different. That's
Okay.
the emergency
Well, you're right.
fund. This one has a much broader application and much more discretion for the governor to use it.
Go ahead.
And Chief Perkins, we've generally tried to keep that right around $1 million, if memory serves me correct. And we're just filling that plot back up.
That's correct. This is putting it back up. That's right. This is refilling it back up.
Okay.
Then priority 3 is out of section 101, which are just on page 21. And this one's kind of a net to zero. What we're doing is this is basically our receptionist. We've been doing that through a temp agency and so this is a transfer, not additional money, but just moving money from a 900 series, from which you've been paying that, to to the 100 series so that we can have this person. Or is that the answer?
Go ahead.
So would that be your priority 3 and priority 4?
No, that's priority 3 and priority 3. There's two lines there. You see, one is, one decreases the 900 series and the other increases the 100 series.
But it's the same, is the position.
No, they're, no.
Different?
Different.
Okay, thank you.
Priority 4 is also again on page 23. What that is as one new administrative assistant, this would be a new position. This isn't a transfer. This is a new position. I can tell you that outside of the governor's executive assistant, his personal executive assistant, and then an executive assistant who works downstairs with the policy office with all the policy folks. There is no other administrative help in the office. So this one is actually one that would provide a lot of assistance to me as well as the deputy director or the deputy chief in providing administrative assistance to our work, everything from helping us manage our calendars to making sure that we show up on time when you invite us to certain meetings. We struggle with just keeping up with the administrative tasks sometimes, and it gets us in a little bit of trouble. And so this is actually a new position.
So my question is, and it might be helpful if, I know that we've cut 2 or 3 positions out of the chief executive's office over the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. And I think we did in 2015, 16. So what I'd like to know is what your past numbers over time are fully staffed within the governor's office, just so we can have a comparison of what's out there. And then the obvious question is, can this person dual function as the secretary who's out front and still perform other functions than just sitting out front in the front desk?
And so let's go back. I think we're conflating a little bit. The priority 3 is actually the receptionist out front. So that is, and I can tell you that person has to be answering the phone and at that desk from the minute the office opens until that office leaves. And so we rotate in with existing staff so that everybody takes a turn so that person can have lunch, or if they've got days off or things like that. So we do that. I can just tell you that this other one, priority 4 is a new position. We actually tasked the receptionist out there. She's not just sitting there all day answering the phone or waiting for somebody at the end. She's very capable one we have now. And so she is doing additional tasks, but she is very limited about because of her presence is required to be at that desk. So she's limited about what she can do other than being gone for a few minutes. This one is a higher level to both help. We've got everything from the deputy chief, who's also deputy counsel. You've got me. You've got our special projects person who plans everything, who plans all the special projects from whatever the governor's in on, as well as our communications and press secretary upstairs. And we have no administrative help.
Okay. Further questions? Please proceed.
Thank you. The next one we have is the Education Commission for Commission of the States, and that's on page 38. This is and usually what we've done with this is one that kind of was cut back in 2020.
I think you were part of that cut.
Yeah, I think we did that cut. And so this is kind of a combination. This is just not only allows the governor to participate, but also the superintendent of public education also benefits from this membership. Provides the opportunity to have that participation in that nationwide education discussion and conference.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Perkins, backing up to that new position on page 23, the governor recommends 221,000 biennial for ongoing and 2,500 one time. Is the one time for the office setup expenses or something different?
The one time is just for the additional, the additional equipment, the computer and just the phones and things like that at the desk. Yep. Thank you. Then the other one on priorities, on the human capital, AWACS, is on page 103. And so you'll see there that really that's just, we're just talking about positions there. It's not any additional money. Then you have, 7 is just our review of the TRP. That's just a technology replacement program that's gone through. That's got, I think if you'll look at that page, we've got, which is on page 24. You'll see, I believe we have the appropriate review and approvals from ETS. We also then the customer relation management software. You'll see that the product 8 and 9 are kind of together there, and those are on page 25 and 26. And that is, those are our licenses for like our Salesforce and the ability to, the licenses for Salesforce, and then the relation management software is a vendor who provides hours to us to help adjust that software so it meets our needs. We use Salesforce is how we do it matches our calendaring. Anybody who asks for the governor, any requests, any appearance requests, any kind of involvement that requires the governor goes in through a Salesforce, and we actually have that managed now. So for example, if you want to meet with the governor, you can go in through our portal, you put that in, that actually creates a ticket in Salesforce that then comes to our both the policy staff as well as the governor's scheduler. And it's how we manage those things. We're actually way out in front. We've actually had a lot of other states who have talked to us when we've sent our staff to some of these governor association meetings, and they talk about that. We've had a lot of interest of how we've been able to adapt that. We're way ahead of the schedule on how we use that. And so this is, that 48,000 is to make sure that continue to make sure that when that changes or we need changes, we've got the ability to do that with that software as well. And then CRM license to make sure that that we have, I think it's 5 additional licenses or several different licenses. So everybody who's supposed to have a license actually has a license. Then we've got some and line 10 again is basically software upgrades, which are also basically part of the technology replacement program. Those are the upgrades or the subscriptions that we need to continue on to the next.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could we go back to number 8, priority number 8? So this is a contract with a vendor for custom programming, right, to increase, customer service. I guess I'm curious on why it would be ongoing as in terms of a one-time request to make those changes. If you could just shed some light for me as a newbie, thanks, that would be great.
Sure. What we do with that is as from time to time, we find changes that we need to make to how we use Salesforce, basically. And so as we sit down, for example, it's also how we manage all of our boards and commissions. We find that we're able to find better efficiencies in everything from how we download and how you interface with whether it's Excel or other spreadsheet and databases. And so having this enables us to continue to evolve the use of Salesforce so that it continues to be effective. And as our needs change or as we find another use for it, that we have the ability to implement that and get some expertise in programming expertise so that we can make those adjustments in Salesforce and use it more effectively.
Larson.
So Chief Perkins, on that, so do we use that software currently?
Oh, yes.
And so we've got that budgeted amount in your budget now. This is is this expanding what we do with it? Is why we got the exception request? I just want to make sure I'm understanding accurately.
Sure. Let's go back and let me go back and just go through this a little bit differently. So if we go to priority 8, which is the customer relation management software, and if so what we're doing there mostly is, that's page 25, thank you. So when we have that relation management, which again is Salesforce, we use it to, for example, if someone calls our constituent hotline, that's the person who calls, what they called about, what that problem is. If there's a resolution referral, that gets put into Salesforce. If you come in, if you send an invitation to the governor to attend this or to come and speak at that or to come and do that, whether you do that, if that comes into our office or someone in the staff, they make a Salesforce ticket with all the information of who applied, what it is, what the organization is, all that data that you need to know to evaluate what that request is, the dates, et cetera. If you go into through the governor's portal on his website, and you have an invitation or you have a request for appearance, there's a number of boxes you fill in with that information. Those go in and create Salesforce tickets. That all goes into Salesforce. So any kind of scheduling, any kind of contact with anybody that contacts our office makes its way into Salesforce. And from that, then we're able to go back. And so if we've got an invitation from somebody who invites the governor to come and speak at an opening, we're able to come back. We know if that person has contacted us about other things, if there's other issues, if there are other things like that. We use it for security. We use it to help match and understand who we're dealing with and what other things are going on with them besides maybe this one request. We use it to manage calendar events. We use it to manage our boards and commissions, all of our boards and commissions. If you go in and look at our boards and commissions and you can do run vacancy reports, you're actually manipulating Salesforce in that regard. So we use it across to keep track of the over 1,000 appointments that the governor makes. We use it to do all those things. And as we develop that, as we use that and we find different ways to do it, or we find a different use that we might need for the data we've collected in Salesforce, this 48,000 ongoing allows us or gives us the ability to then contract with a Salesforce programming company, which we have several who are pre-qualified. They've gone through the procurement process, and so they're kind of recognized. There's 4 or 5 of them. And with the hourly rates that have been negotiated through our procurement folks at A&I, we know that we can just go and we can have those people come in and we can say, this is our problem. This is what we need you to help us make what Salesforce do. And so they can make those adjustments so that we continue to evolve how we use it and use it more effectively. That's what the programming in that extra is for that ongoing. Then the other part, the next one, is the licenses. As we continue to expand it and its use in our office, we need to have more licenses available. We are in the process of that. I know we've had a lot of discussions about that. There's Salesforce. There's one other one that gets used a lot across the state. And so we're actually now talking with them about, because of its used so broadly across the enterprise, about having enterprise licenses. So we've got ETS and procurement and I are all working on those issues. And making some progress in doing that, instead of having to go out and have a license for each individual, coming and having enterprise-wide licenses and doing a little bit differently. So we're looking at trying to find those efficiencies, but that's what those are. That's what those are.
Go ahead. Don.
And it also, was also correct, this also provides for the upgrades to the next versions as well, which is unfortunately the way of software. They're all subscriptions now.
Okay, go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we will try not to interject very often, but on page 25 and 26, the narrative and the governor's recommendation indicate, as Representative Sherwood and Representative Larson said, ongoing. On the table, which appears on page 31, this item was classified as one time. Typically, the Joint Appropriations Committee votes on the tables. Based upon this discussion, we will change that table from 903 to 901 to reflect the ongoing nature.
That's probably not a bad idea.
Okay,
Okay, go ahead.
thank you. I just want to check back and see if I've answered those questions on priority 8 and 9. Anything else?
I think so.
Okay, thank you. Again, 10 again is just software license upgrades. It's gone through we have the approval process. It's on page 107. Excuse me, 27. Then the next one after that is the 400 series redevelopment maintenance programmer hourly time. That's on page 28.
Any questions? All right, go ahead.
Needs to be, and which is basically that's our time from ETS folks to come and help us do our job. Then 12 is the governor's art collection. As you know, that's on page 29. The governor continues to be the governor goes out and goes to these art shows. He acquires art for the governor's art collection as part of then housed or part of the state museum. Maybe if you come down and look, you have the benefit of the governor's art show that graces the walls of the extension during the session oftentimes. And so this is money that is used to purchase those Wyoming artists collections and continue to expand and support those arts there. And if you come into the office, many of the works of art you find in our offices are parts of that art collection.
So with this amount of money, it must be fine art, I take it.
Yeah. You know, that's a heck of a price for art.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
reading the narrative, Mr. Chairman, this is what it costs to rent the art for the governor's office from the state museum. And they are upping their rent charges, and the governor's office is a tier 3 entity. And so the charges are going to be higher in the upcoming biennium. And my question then is, why is the state structured such that the governor has to rent it from another state agency that is funded by the state? It seems like we're just swapping money from one pocket to the next to make the.
Well, if you look at that, I mean, they have, first of all, Mr. Chairman, I think the answer to that is, one, you have to continue to support the arts. And that's exactly what this is, you rotate these things. They're not, there's a curation, they have to be transported. When they come in, they have to be transported over and displayed. And so you're continuing to support that. If we don't support or pay for that usage, it ends up coming out of the state museum's budget. And is less there for the curation and support of the arts otherwise. So
It sounds like something Kevin would be interested in. Just collecting money to pay us all back.
well, we, if you get the good budget director started, I'm sure we could pull it into the statewide cost allocation. We have it through there, or
Mr. Chairman,
if we don't get that much federal support.
Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I have a question on that. It says that tier 3 allows up to 25 works of art at 1,600. Is that 1,600 per work of art, or do you get up to that amount for $1,600? Could you get 10 works of art for $1,600?
So in going back, and the answer is, I think you just use up to the $1,600 in the purchase of art, whether it be 1 or whether it be 10. And I would go back. It also supports the purchase of art. It's not just the rent, but it also does support the purchase of art. Pardon me?
Okay. Let's
Okay.
proceed.
Then, yeah, so we go out and we purchase up to 20. The governor works to purchase up to 25 pieces of art per year. And this goes to participate in that as partly. Next item is priority 13, which is the blockchain task force funding. You all know about blockchain task force funding. That's on page 40. And so this to continue to, that's where the money resides to support the non-legislative members of the blockchain task force.
Does blockchain task force go on forever?
Unless you tell us to stop. That's a creature of legislation, if I do remember, Mr. Chairman.
Should it go on forever?
Well, at some point, maybe, I don't know if ultimately all the blocks are chained together or not at some point, but I suppose as long as it continues to be there continues to be work to be done, and obviously we continue to see that expanding. While we're here, I would just make a note with respect to stablecoin, which isn't really in here, and I want to talk about that just for a minute. The stable token, excuse me, the Table Token Commission has kind of completed that work, which just has been recently. And so if you go back and look at the enabling legislation, that actually is now basically a separate governmental agency. It was created by the legislature in the last session. And they've done that. There is not there wasn't really, as that came through, there's not a budget proposal that came through for that commission to continue its work and to stand up the stable token itself. And so I think, and we checked in with Mr. Richards yesterday. I think they're going to come and testify in front of you that we selected a director of that commission, Anthony. He has an appointment to come and talk to you, but there's a budget proposal that came out of the commission, but because of the timing and other things, there's not really a budget proposal. So there's nothing in our budget specifically, and the governor's budget is proposed either in our agency or any other agency with respect to the stable token.
So I think conceptually, we were going to put some startup dollars in there, but then the sale of a token was supposed to
That's
cover
right. There
lots
was
of operations.
the 400,000, whatever's left of the 400,000 or so that was originally appropriated is still in our office. But when that's up and running and moving forward, I think my recollection was their budget recommendation between 8 and 10 million. And so they'll make a presentation to you in January, and then y'all and the rest of the legislature get to decide about how and what that moves forward, what that looks like.
Yeah, well, hopefully we'll get the materials on that before they present, so we can review their $8 to $10 million budget and where that's going to come from.
There was a report that was turned in November 1st. And that's being refined. I know that we've also talked to the blockchain folks and all the legislatures that have been involved in that. So they're aware of this. We just wanted to make sure, identify that as that's kind of a crack in this whole thing that needs to get addressed at some point.
Yeah, because that's clearly way outside what was presented to us when the legislation was passed. Any type of. Yeah. Okay, look forward to it.
Then the one other thing I would mention there, that go to priority 14, and then I've got one other comment. Priority 14, which is on page 42, which is the wild horse management, and that is actually money and that will go out, as I understand it, goes out to the tribes mostly for horse management.
So, Chief, the question about this is, we provided funds before. I think they did 3 rounds up. What we would like to see is what the benefits are, where the work was done. It's not, we don't mind funding it, but we want to know that the funds are being used properly and how they were spent and whether or not it's a useful use of the funds. So there's nothing in what was presented to us that has any explanation of that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
a few additional questions to that is what money the BLM contributes to this project. Additionally, the horses that end up at the honor farm, does the honor farm get paid to do the training, or do they get to retain the funds when they sell the horses through the honor farm? Does the BLM pay the feed bills? You know, what additional cost is the state incurring through this project once it hits the honor farm, and what possible revenues are on that side?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I think your staff can provide you the report, because the report for that funding was tied to the joint agriculture. So that report on exactly how the dollars have been spent was provided already to the LSO and the legislature. So just need to circulate that to.
Well, actually, if that's the case, then Don, could you just have that circulated to us?
But that's already been turned in. And so there was 2 uses of funds under the previous expenditures. One contract was with the tribes. And so only on the Wind River Reservation, the tribes rounded up, I believe it's a total of 6,000 horses. And in that situation, you're talking about a lot of feral horses. It's not a traditional wild horse herd, but you're just talking about tremendous range damage that's been happening there. I'm sure the Fremont County members of this committee could talk about that. And so that was a very successful program. And that's why we're coming back to ask for that is that we're talking about some.
So that's a total over a certain number of years, though. I didn't do that last summer.
That was over 2 years. So it's been an incredibly positive program. Separately, to Representative Walters' question, the Department of Corrections has a contract with BLM to do the program that they do at the Honor Farm in Riverton. Those are separate. So the Bureau of Land Management does pay for that program. We did make an investment because one of the things that the Honor Farm had noticed is that they could do a little bit more work with more inmates and more horses if they had an additional corral and other equipment. So that was the other portion of that contract that was used. And so that was really a one-time investment. And so that was very positive. But the Bureau of Land Management has a contract with the Department of Corrections for that program. So they do pay for that part of it. And the Department of Corrections is going to have to, I think they've been notified that there will be a new bidding process for that program going forward. So that was a little bit of a surprise since this all happened.
Representative Lawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rennie, on the program that was done with the Winter Reservation, it really was successful. They've rounded up quite a lot, but I'm curious, and maybe it's in the report, but did the tribes, was there any type of matching fund and then that they participated in, and then didn't we make a requirement? Because I think those rounded up truck to Canada where they could be sold. But any revenue off that, I thought as a condition of the money had to be put back in that program. Am I recalling that accurately?
Mr. Chairman, you are. That's exactly right.
Okay, any follow-up questions? Go ahead.
Chairman, I have two questions. It would seem like we may be stampeding on the BIA's territory with 400,000 to the reservation. And then the second question is, what does the Wind River Reservation do with 6,000 horses? The BLM tries to get them trained and that kind of stuff. Do they just sell them off?
As I noted, they were sold it to Canada, up in Canada where they can process them. Can them. There's no facilities in the US that can do that anymore.
Okay. Go ahead.
Rory just told me that in biennial fiscal year 17-18, that our official count in the governor's office 25 positions, we're now 20.
That's helpful.
And
Can you repeat that?
Sure, that we had in 17-18, we were at 25, and now we're currently at 20. The record ombudsman resides in our office, but is not a member of our staff. So sometimes people get confused and think that was a staff addition, but that was they had to be somewhere in there in the governor's office, but they're not technically part of the governor's office. They're an independent. They work independently of everybody.
Kevin used to be part of the governor's office, but not anymore.
Well, he used to be part of A&I. Now he's just part of himself.
Okay, further questions on priority 14? So now are we?
So the rest of that is Homeland
Homeland
Security,
Security,
which you'll do is separate. The other thing I would mention is we talked a little bit, Mr. Chairman, recently about litigation funds, and I went back and looked, and I was wrong. The only litigation funds that are available are that you had, there was in the 2021 session, there's $1.2 million of unobligated litigation funds that are in our office that are specifically related to MPUs regarding fighting anything with respect to the export of coal or early closing of coal-fired electrical generation. There's some language in there about that impermissibly impede the use of coal. And so I think that just as we look at those litigation funds, as we've talked about, certainly the litigation landscape is much broader than just coal these days. And so whether that, I think that as we look at that and just, and that money is continuously appropriated, so there's not a request for it here. but certainly the ability to broaden
For
that
the
language
purpose.
so that we can use it for a broader range of purposes might.
So is the balance still roughly 1.2?
That's correct.
So Don, would you make a note of that, so that we can do a corrective language on the use of those funds?
At least as of September, as of the September sheet that I looked at, it's completely unencumbered at this
Go
point.
ahead. That's interesting.
And so, Mr. Chairman, the intent of that appropriation for that was to, as we see other public service commissions trying to being approached by utilities in various states that use Powder River Basin coal, who are attempting to on early shutdowns, is to participate in those litigative processes and have the ability to represent Wyoming's interests in industries. And that was the intent of that. And it indeed was pretty specific. A little surprised that none of it's been used.
And those were all budgetary items, were they not?
Yeah,
Or was it?
yeah, Mr. Chairman. And I mean, the other places that most of the monies come from to push back or to hire experts or in some cases even hire counsel has been for the FERNERPA account. And so that's been hit more frequently because usually that litigation probably doesn't really quite fit within the restrictions here. I just bring that to your attention between FERNERPA and this account. That's basically where it is for anything that we can't absorb that we don't already have in the AG's office. I did talk with the Attorney General this morning, just asking her if she was aware of any additional funds that she might have in her office. And if you limited, there's not a litigation fund other than these couple that we've talked about. Just
Mr.
wanted to
Chairman?
bring that to your attention as you think about
Senator
it.
Guru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Chief, are you proposing, you're going to propose language to do that? Is that what, so we should be expecting that for those funds?
No, Mr. Chairman, the only reason I bring that up is we've had a number of other legislators talk to us about, we've had, we should put 30 million in litigation funds. I just was trying to bring that since it's continuously, that 1.2 is continuously appropriated and hasn't been used. And for NERPA, that's the only money that we have to do the litigation. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. If you start in that discussion of where it is, where that money is, how it, and kind of where we're at and what we're able to use it for at this point in time.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you. When we're talking about litigation funds, Mr. Chief, what does that mean? Does that mean just paying for counsel?
It could mean, I think generally means it's paying for outside counsel, or it's that we can't otherwise, obviously it'd have to be within the restrictions pushed upon the money. And I think it's that, and I think it also could be used for experts in the right, sir. Oftentimes, and particularly for NERPA, gets used for experts a lot.
So when we're talking about appropriating millions of dollars in litigation funds, really what that means is millions of dollars to outside attorneys, correct?
Yes. They would either because we don't have the capacity because of numbers or technical expertise in the AG's office. But yes. So again, I don't know that you have, I've heard the number $30 million. I don't know that you don't need 30, you need some money. We've had this 1.2 million for since 2021. We haven't used any of it yet. Doesn't mean that we won't. I can tell you, for example, it happens other ways. For example, in the OCA's office, and you heard the request for about $700,000 in 900 series in the OCA, Office of Consumer Advocate, because of what industry hired away the expertise in that office. And so with the rate cases that we had coming up this year, we hired outside counsel through the 900 series at OCA because we didn't have the capacity or the expertise in the office. We're requiring it at a rapid rate as they participate, but having lead counsel elsewhere that knew that was important. So again, there's other ways to do it besides just having a big pot of money. I just was highlighting that, not that we have a different ask, but just to bring that to your awareness. And there's other ways to do it. Obviously, is just provide ability to use, you know, if you broaden some ability and other funds that are out there, if it's needed, that it's there, but we don't have a particular ask other than what we've got.
So, my recollection is somebody had a roommate who was trying to get rid of the OCA for a while. What's the status of that in term, what's their total budget, and is the new council sufficiently qualified? Because that's not an easy job to do.
So, and the answer, I believe, Anthony's a good attorney and Anthony's experienced. What we had is there's 2 additional counsel in there and some analysts that got hired away. And so we had to go back and get the attorneys he hired didn't have a lot of experience. And so as they went through, particularly the most recent rate case, they hired some outside expertise. Now, the inside counsel is co-counseling on that, and Anthony certainly led that. But we both acquired the expertise and the support, as well as now accumulating that ability within the offices.
Well, I guess the ultimate point of my question to you is, just for example, with Rocky Mountain Power and the primary folks who were addressing that rate hike was the OCA, and which saves a lot of money for ratepayers. And so I just want to have you touch upon that and the importance of the OCA and having somebody there to fill those shoes.
Well, and I think that's exactly right. I think there's Mr. Chairman, as we know, the OCA is housed within the Public Service Commission, but it's an independent agency. The Public Service Commission is not an advocate for the state of Wyoming. The purpose of the Public Service Commission is to apply the law and the facts with respect to applications from regulated utilities or others that come under their jurisdiction, to provide them to recognize or review the costs that are put in for various reasons, and then to make sure that that they get the rate of return that they're entitled to under the law and the regulations with respect to that. When it comes in and you have a rate case, of which if we talk about the most recent one with the Rocky Mountain Power, obviously it was a very big rate case. It had, they were coming in looking for a 33%. The result is it looks like it's going to be about 8.2, which is a little over 8% is, I think, what the ultimate order is probably it looks like it's going to come out from what I read in the paper. But it's not, nobody goes back and determines that rate percentage. No one says, okay, that's this. What they do back is they go back and they look at each individual cost requirement, whether it's a return on investment, what the investments were made, why they were made, what other costs are being brought across the system, whether those are carbon abatement fees from Oregon or carbon credit taxes from somewhere else, or investments in transmission, in whatever it is, costs that increase in wages. They look at all those different components. And so in this case, the public utility, the regulated utility brings in all that information, and you're looking at all those individual costs and you're examining each of those individual costs in the context of how they were expended and why they were expended. And then going back and examining those against the law to determine whether or not those are allowable recoverable costs by the utility. And so so you go out, and then ultimately, reasons 8% is you go back and you look and say, okay, these are the allowable costs. And then you look at those costs compared, and so you back into the 8%, but you're looking at a very detailed analysis of all the costs compared against what they're allowed to recover under the laws and the regulations that both Wyoming and the federal government have put out there. And so it's very technical. You have to understand the law. You have to have significant analysis capability to understand what those costs are, how they were applied, and where they fit in the whole rubric of providing reliable energy across the grid. So it takes a lot of expertise to do that, and you need that in the PSC to just review that from the law perspective, but you need an advocate to look at it from the ratepayer's perspective and to make those arguments on behalf of the ratepayer. And that's what the OCA does. We can't afford not to have.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I wanted to dovetail this conversation together with my own commentary. I've been troubled by the increasing practice of seeing litigation funds with tens of millions of dollars allocated to it, because it doesn't seem to make any pragmatic sense to me about that amount of funds and the purpose of those funds. And it's not fiscally prudent or conservative in any way, shape, or form. But to this point of the importance of the OCA, of which I supported and angered the roommate at the time, and its value today, it does indicate perhaps the need to look at both the PSC and the OCA and evaluate whether or not the salaries associated with the specific expertise required is appropriate. And rather than doing tens of $1 millions in litigation funding to outside counsel, instead we bring that talent in-house and pay them appropriately and save tens of millions of dollars in the long run.
You're here. Go ahead.
Mr.
Your
Chairman.
comment, and then we'll go to question.
Mr. Chairman, just to answer the question, so going back and looking at the Public Service Commission, which will appear in front of you, the Public Service Commission itself is $9,358,000. The Office of Consumer Advocate is $2,226,000. So those are not, those are, really fairly modest investments to make sure that ratepayers in the state of Wyoming are.
I presume that that's at least 70 or 80% salary.
Yeah, I mean, they're like most things, it's mostly personnel. There's not a lot of equipment.
What's the cost allocation adjustment for that? No. Okay, I think Senator Drews. No, okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to your budget book, Chief Perkins, on page 55, you have $20 million for public welfare emergencies. That is continuously appropriated already. So with this ask in the standard budget, it would turn out to be $40 million if I'm not mistaken. So is the goal to just remain at 20 million, or are you hoping for 40?
I believe that's 20. I believe the continuous appropriation is that it stays continuously appropriated at 20 million. It doesn't go to 40. It's just the 20.
Okay.
Yeah, that was our presumption too, but couldn't quite tell.
Just wanted to confirm that. And then, Mr. Chairman, we discussed the matching funds earlier, if I may continue. We discussed matching funds earlier in the morning, both the energy matching funds, the infrastructure matching funds. Does the governor expect those to just lapse at the end of this biennium, or does he intend on a governor's letter to request that they continue? Or are you willing to share what his crystal ball will be sharing with the legislature?
I'll phone a friend on that one. Good policy.
Go ahead.
Policy advisor.
Ready?
Mr. Chairman, thanks. Provided you the report on the infrastructure matching funds in October, and the energy matching funds. So the governor in chief have updated you on the status of those. Those are continuing to have some value in terms of leveraging. I believe we all shared the intent that if there were opportunities for Wyoming to match 4-to-1 as the infrastructure matching funds require, to bring $4 in for every one, that's a pretty good investment, and that is working. So the governor does intend to ask for an extension on both of those via letter.
Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just asking for some clarification on page 50. It's the special contingency division number 600. Under contractual services, the base budget shows 80 million, and then the rest of it's zero. And the recommendation is for the standard. So I'm just asking for clarification, Chief, on do we have sort of an average figure that we expect to plan for the perhaps contractual services contingency over the years, or because the way, if I'm reading it right, there's only 21 million on the right side on the recommendation.
Have happened with the emergency response and public welfare emergencies is the public welfare emergencies is just the legislation just provides the ability in either an economic emergency or disaster or a public health emergency or disaster, that this just gave the governor typically, really the number was that particular legislation goes to the 20 million that's appropriated. We have ever yet to use that. We've looked at that a couple times. We were looking at potentially this last winter with all the snow and there we had a lot of towns that were struggling with their snow budgets and things like that. We sent out and actually got quite a bit of information. And really, it was kind of interesting. The snow budgets, for example, really hadn't been exceeded by more. There have been years where this wasn't any worse than any other year. There have been a few places that were particularly hit hard, but across the state, we didn't see any widespread where it was just out of control. And so we ultimately elected not to use it for that. But we've looked at it a few times in that regard with respect to public health emergencies or public other kind of economic emergencies where that would go. We've just always tried to be very, very judicious with that. We've had a couple times we've considered it and thought about it and then decided not to because we thought we could handle it a different way. So we'll just continue to be prudent with that. But I mean, I don't think that I'm aware of that we've ever used that since it's been there, but it doesn't mean that it wouldn't happen. Of course, obviously COVID would have been a great opportunity, but the federal government stepped up and we didn't have to use it. And I did.
Kevin, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just a brief Chapter 17 lesson. When you see column 2 and you see the base budget, that $80,475,000, that is the last intent of the legislature that we collaborate with LSO on. This is how you appropriate the money. In this case, there's appropriation for $80 million one time for infrastructure matching. So when it becomes one time, what will happen, you'll see that this is what you gave them last biennium, but we've made an adjustment to this budget by removing that 80 million because the intent of the legislature was to have that to be one time. Now, the special contingency, we have used it in the past, long past for floods, I believe, but also remember because of the nature of the budget for the Youth Challenge Academy, we lent them some money through that and then they paid us back. We couldn't just spend the money out of the Youth Challenge Academy because the budget rules wouldn't allow it. So if you recall, we lent it, brought it back, so that contingency allowed us to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a legal ability to taking care of that situation. So those are just the two examples of that and also what's going on with the base budget.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then Chief Perkins, I may have misheard you, but I thought I heard you refer to the special contingency on page 50. Then you used the public welfare emergencies as shown on page 55, almost synonymously, but I want to clarify that those are different. And the special contingency we've had in place for a number of years. We brought that public welfare emergency in place in file 50 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Time flies, to be used and replenished out of the LSRA about 10 million a year, I believe. And
Mr. Chairman,
Actually, those are the same. The 20 million on page 50 under public welfare emergencies, the 20 million you see there, and the 20 million on page 55 are the same number, are the same.
They're the same money.
Unit. That's the same money, same unit. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, and we have not yet used the public welfare emergencies funding. It provides us $10 million a year if necessary, but there's a declaration, there's a process that you have to go through to use that. The special contingency is a place where we can have funding that where we're exposed to unusual circumstances, that we can be nimble with those. And that would happen through a B11 naturally, and we put a 10-day cycle on it to where we were communicating on that like we did the last time.
Okay, so Don, just, I think that at some point if we have some extra time, let's go back and walk through the total amounts that we put into the funds for the governor and how it could be expended and what the purpose was. I think a refresher course on that will be useful at some point in time.
That would be Okay, we can write that up. And I just wanted to point out on page 50, you're looking at the division. That division has a couple of different units in it. And then on page 55, you actually see the unit where the 20 million. So those aren't double budget. Those are just the division, then later on the breakout of the units.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chief Perkins. Big picture question here. In the Department of Health, the governor proposes using some reversions to fund some Title 25 items. Last year in legislation, we used Department of Health reversions up to 39 million for demolition at the state hospital in Evanston. Does the governor anticipate the reversions for Title 25 to take place before or after the demolition account is filled?
So the question is, did you forget that, or did you just want to override us?
No, I actually, it's, the community of Evanston and Uena County seem to have, it seems like at least every other week we get some request that it not be demolished, but we haven't done anything to stop that. We've continued to support. We've had a number of discussions with people and certainly talked to them, but we continue to support Director Johansson in what he's trying to do there. I don't think nothing particularly has changed there. I think that people continue to look at that. I think if there's going to be something done, I think the legislature is going to need to give us some direction, because we don't have any direction I'm not aware of any direction from the governor to change course on any of that. We've certainly talked and to a lot of legislators and a lot of local people about those issues. And we continue to involve Director Johansson in all those discussions with respect to demolition efforts out at the state hospital. And we continue to defer to Director Johansson. He's a great director and does a good job. And we haven't received different direction or instruction from the legislature in that regard.
So Kevin, and then Lloyd, I want you to chime in on.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, yes, the first thing that takes place is the facilities in Title 25, and what's remaining then goes over to the demo. There's up to $39 million for the demo, as you stated, and we did transfer $1.2 million to that demo project. But it's the tail end of the process that receives the demo money.
I think one of that's kind of has been a kind of a lagging thing for him to get started was, I don't think that the legislative language that allowed those reversions to be used on the demolition. I think one of the things he needs is he needs a building. He needs a metal building built for some storage space down there, some things like that, in order to facilitate and create some space. And I don't think the language in there was broad enough for him to do that. And so that's been one of the factors that I think has kind of prevented him from moving forward full speed on what he was directed to do. You can visit with about that one.
So I'm a little curious. So we set up the account that could handle up to 39 million, but we allowed for up to 15 million in last year's budget to go into that demolition account. And so I guess my question then, did that end at the end of that supplemental budget if there wasn't enough reversion then? And now we're putting the Title 25, because we put that as a high priority to put, you can't demolish it. If you can't go out to bid, you can't do anything if you don't have funds in place, which comes to the point on the metal building. And so in this conversation, are we starting anew with that process? And then we're saying that the Title 25 diversion is priority over diverting funds into that demolition account? Is that what we're saying there?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the demolition account is for the extent of this biennium. There is no provision yet to do something similar of that nature with the Department of Health. We used $80 million. That was how much money in reversion anticipated. And recall, a large portion of that was the sunsetted FMAP percent of 6.2%. We enjoyed that, and that was what led to most of those dollars of that $80 million. And then It is Title 25, it's the facilities, and we have that basically in this year's request as well, to do something similar to along the lines to get us through the Title 25. Once the facilities have been stood up, we should be able to be more self-sufficient with that exercise. But this biennium, $80 million, and remember FMAP, and then what took place on the tail end there, what becomes available after that, we can go up to $39 million for the demo project.
It's 15, wasn't it? I think the count could handle 39, but we allowed for 15 in that biennium. That was a conversation. So how much was left? Did we expend all the reversion?
Right now, we've transferred over $1.2 million and we have not completed this biennium's exercise. So whatever takes place between now and June 30th and how it tips would lend into probably, most likely, more money going into the demo account through this biennium.
And I, Mr. Chairman, I guess that's kind of what I was asking. We would anticipate additional funds up to that 15 million. Doesn't know if we'll get there, but we'd anticipate those reversions being tipped into the.
I think that's a fair statement, but I would put a caveat on that we no longer have the FMAP that's helping us along the way. So we have less to operate with.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And so, Mr. Representative Larson, would you just give an update on our recent court discussions on beginning the demolition in Evanston, and what needs to happen? There's like, what, 28 buildings or 14 buildings that have to come down, and some we preserved, some we didn't. We prioritized some of them. You couldn't possibly save anything out of them. And so it's a lot more complicated conversation in terms of just having some local folks who are upset with it. And not only that, for 5 years, we took public comment and asked, and we had publications in a local newspaper saying, we're going to demolish these things and we want public input. For several years, we had zero public input. But it's a problem that has to be worked out because some of those buildings really have to come down because they're dangerous. But you have a better description of that than I.
Well, and Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think that we'll probably have a little further conversation when we get to the Department of Health budget. But I think, you know, in fairness to the conversation, the consideration of what we should do with those buildings as the new state hospital was intended from the beginning to be demolished. But during the design phase of the new state hospital, the community came to us and asked if we could extend the time before demolition took place in case there were some entities, particularly the city of Evanston or the Uintah County, that wanted to do something with that old campus. There were mixed feelings amongst the local government, some that said we want it, some that says we don't want it because of they have the roundhouse there and that consumes a lot of their revenue. And so at the end of the construction season, there was not a plan in place to use that. There was a study that was funded by the Business Council that looked at opportunities to use that old campus and other auxiliary campuses that suggested maybe if the state would infuse about 56 million or a minimum 26 million, we could redo that whole campus. That was never the intent of the state to do that. And so then that kind of went quiet as we continued on looking at those buildings and designing a demolition plan. There's been some, as Chief Perkins pointed out, there's been some local interest on the private side of coming in and doing that and postponing the demolition of the building until they can consider that. I think the position of the Department of Health, and I'm certainly not speaking for them, but I think we've legislatively we put into place the demolition plan and to get that done. Each year we postpone that, it just costs us more. So I think that's kind of the update. I think that one of the buildings in the demolition plan, the main old building would stay in place and the others come down. But I think that conversation will come in more detail a little later on in the budget hearing.
Okay, it's 10:20. I think it's probably a good time for a break. Are we going to switch over to Homeland Security next, or you can follow up or do anything else when we come back and at 10:35?
I think we're done. I think
Okay,
we're ready to go when.
so Lynn will be up when
Who's
we're
ready to go?
We'll stand in recess for 15 minutes. Okay, we are back. The hammer happens to be in your drawer. There you go. All right. Welcome, Lynn. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Lynn Budd, and I'm the Director of the Wyoming Office of Homeland Security and the Governor's Homeland Security Advisor. The mission of our agency includes both emergency management and Homeland Security, unlike many other states that have separate agencies for these missions. However, the lines between these missions are becoming increasingly blurred. I'm here today to talk to you about our biennial budget, but also to communicate the current threat landscape for the state of Wyoming and how that connects to the security of our nation. Wyomingites are very resilient, and we hope to continue to assist communities in becoming even more resilient. Our office works to prepare the residents of the state for emergencies, to help them survive those emergencies, and to recover more quickly. Through these activities, we're constantly evaluating threats to the state, whether they're natural, technological, or human caused. We work to assist communities to be prepared to face these threats and to look at mitigation measures that may be taken to reduce the consequences of those threats that at many times we cannot stop. We work to prepare critical infrastructure partners, which are mostly private sector entities, to be better prepared and more resilient to keep our communities functioning and to get back to normal as quickly as possible after an unfavorable event. But we live in a new world. Not only do we need to worry about the effects of natural events such as flood, fire, and blizzard, but we have to be ready to defend ourselves from threats, both foreign and domestic. One of the biggest threats we face today is a cyber attack. These types of threats know no boundaries, and those adversaries will continue to attempt to find the weakest link in order to get in. Over the last several years, we've worked informally with a team of state and federal agencies to defend against that threat. All of us combining our expertise to be an effective team, each of us playing our part. Last year, Governor Gordon made that partnership official by creating the CARE team, which is the Cyber Assistance Response Effort. The team came up with the name and the acronym to illustrate what we wanted to do for our state, to care for them, and to make entities affected by a cyber attack know and feel that the state was there to help, to care for them. Since the governor's executive order, we unfortunately have had opportunities to utilize this team to assist with attacks to our critical infrastructure in the state. While these attacks are inevitable, we had success in supporting a swift response, and in one case, the prevention of an actual attack due to the dedication of those folks at the local level and partnerships with state and federal agencies all coming together for a common goal, to care for and assist that community. It's been a pleasure to continue to evolve these relationships with state and federal partners, especially ETS. We continue to grow and become more effective with the lessons learned from each event. We also face threats from foreign adversaries, both in the cyber realm as well as physical threats to critical infrastructure. So what is critical infrastructure? There's 16 different sectors of resources that we need to be a functioning society. The most important being the lifeline sectors: transportation, water, energy, and communications. Our agency does not hold the key to any one of these sectors, but we must develop partnerships with private, local, state, and federal entities to defend and protect those important functions. As I'm sure you've heard in the news, our adversaries are keen to attack and inhibit the functioning of these sectors. It will come as no surprise to you, in the security of our state and its contribution to national security, Wyoming is a key player in the energy sector. Not only is the energy sector vital to our economy, but the supply of energy to other states is vital to their survival. As a part of our biennial budget request, we are asking for your support of an additional position to add to our one position that also serves as a member of the CARE team. This position will work to protect all 16 sectors of critical infrastructure in the state, with a particular focus on the energy sector. We're asking you to support the addition of this position to our agency, but also to do that with general funds. We feel this type of support shows Wyoming's commitment to providing that energy security to not only our state, but more than 20 other states. Currently, 92% of our agency budget comes from federal and special revenue. While this has been tremendous for our state in building capacity, the volatility at the national level and our dependence on federal funding is not a good strategy for continuity and providing safety and security for the residents of our state. The grants that fund our agency are at the whim of Congress on an annual basis. We do not feel it is prudent to support emergency management and homeland security in our state based on the generosity of Congress. We have continually seen this funding either reduced or remaining static with no adjustments for inflation. In the early years of the Homeland Security Mission after 9/11, we were receiving around $17 to $18 million in the Homeland Security grant. This is just one of the grants that our agency receives. We are currently receiving only about $4.5 million in this grant. These funds were never meant to fully fund the emergency management Homeland Security mission for states and local jurisdictions. They were meant to supplement states' budgets to increase capability both at the state and local level. The state, through our agency, passes funding through to the local level to support emergency management and Homeland Security salaries and other expenses. As these funds are reduced, there's a trickle-down effect to the local level, and we're finding ourselves having to make hard decisions. If we're going to adequately support safety and security in our state, we must make an investment that supports those functions. Pending any general questions, I'll move forward, Mr. Chair, with the presentation of our budget.
Any general questions for Lynn? All right, go ahead. Representative Larson.
Director Bud, thank you. You've presented to us some on this critical infrastructure stuff previously, and I apologize if I missed it in your presentation, but as we work on that critical infrastructure, is there, you've got your interstate stuff that's under the federal kind of oversight, like pipelines, interstate pipelines, and then you've got all of our intrastate stuff that really is privately owned. Are there federal funds on the interstate side that come in and help you with critical infrastructure? And is there anything from industry funds that come in and help you formulate that? Can you enlighten me a little bit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, the grants that we get, specifically the Homeland Security grant, is meant to support that protection of critical infrastructure. That's one of the missions of that particular grant. We do not receive any additional industry funds to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'll just start on page 17 just to illustrate our exception requests.
Lynn, 1 second.
I'm sorry.
So, committee, what I've done is ask Lynn to kind of walk through the budget page by page, section by section, so that units, just so we can follow through, and I've got my notes are all in the book, and I know a lot of us are like that. So, and the ones that there's no comments, you can just kind of, are there questions, and just flip through.
Perfect. We'll run right through it. Okay, just for your reference, on page 17 is our list of exception requests. And then our full budget starts on page 56. On page 57, this is our emergency management performance grant, which is a 50-50 matching grant, which pays the majority of our salaries in our office as well as other support. This is also the grant where we choose to push funds to the local level to support those Homeland Security / emergency management positions, so that they receive 50% of their salaries for those positions. Historically, we've been able to fund other requests from the local level, such as subscriptions for emergency alerting, other equipment. This year, because again of the tightness of the budget and increases in salaries and expenses at the local level, we were only able to fund the salaries for those folks. Okay. All right, we will move to, so the first exception request is in this unit on page 58. Through the coordination and work through the step 3 reductions for COVID, Inadvertently, we had a position moved to half-time as we were looking at different options that got kind of stuck in the system. That position is full-time and it is funded full-time. So this exception request is really not asking for additional funds. It's just a budget correction. Okay, and then on page 59, it's actually listed as our priority number 5. But that is the position that I was speaking about in my introduction. This position would be 100% general funds at this point in time, as we have no other grant funds available to take care of that. And in fact, looking through actually some neighbors in South Dakota and North Dakota, looking at that EMPG funding over the last 10 years, with it remaining steady, we have actually seen a 20% reduction in funding due to inflation. Questions on that position?
So Lynn, I'm just going to your justifications.
Mhm.
And I'm curious, when you talk about what the increase of domestic and foreign threats are, it seems to me we need to be more specific about what those threats are and what can and can't be done about those threats. And if there are things out there that need to be an executive session to talk about, because we don't really know for sure what they are, other than what we read in the newspaper or how we feel.
Mhm.
Versus what real threats exist.
Mhm.
And this goes to your $2 million funding request as well. I think in part, we need to know what a specific plan is and how those funds will be used to address those specific threats and issues that we have. And if any of those need to be in executive session, we'd be happy to do that as well. But I think that for a comfort zone for the appropriations, we just need more specific data on what we're really talking about, whose responsibility is. The other thing that I'd like to see is we've got ETS, we have you, we have the governor's office. They all have different components that do this, have these same general overlapping responsibilities. So could you tell me who your cyber assistance team or your threat team is, who's on it, how often you meet, what presentations? I mean, that's kind of new to me on exactly how all that works. So I think it'd be helpful we better understand that as well.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to fill you in on some of that, and then I'd be happy to provide more information in an executive session as well. The cyber assistance response team is made up of the critical infrastructure person and cybersecurity person in our office, members of ETS, as well as the person that oversees the critical infrastructure position in our office. And of course, Deputy Director Niken and I both participate in conversations on those teams as well. They also include members of the federal government, DHS, called INA, Information and Analysis or Intelligence and Analysis, as well as the FBI, other federal partners, MSISAC, we bring them in, which is the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. We utilize their services when we're working through a response. And then, yeah, basically that's additional state agency members, the National Guard is also a member of the team. We do meet on a monthly basis. As per the executive order, we're just beginning to do the review of both our statewide strategic plan for cybersecurity, which is required by the next grant I'll get, or another grant I'll get to, which is the cybersecurity grant with the infrastructure bill. So we have those folks, and then we have that plan with them, but we also have our cyber disruption plan that we talk about how are we going to respond to a cyber incident. And so we're getting ready to do a review of that plan and a report back to the governor on that.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed. Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. All right. So we will go then to page.
By the way, if there are reports or recommendations that come out of that committee that you want to share in camera, I think we'd like to see those well. I mean,
perfect.
It's one thing to hear about it, but to see what's actually being done, I think is probably more.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
Great. We'll work to put some information together for you as well. Okay, so on page 63, this is the Community Assistance Program, State Support Services element. This supports not supports, is the coordinator for the National Flood Insurance Program for the state. This grant funds one position with 80%, and then we have a 20% non-federal matching funds for that. Moving to page 66. This is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant. It is only used as a pass-through. There are no funds that are provided by the state for this particular grant. A jurisdiction applies at the local level to the federal government for these types of grants, which help reduce the consequences of a flooding situation. Okay. I will move on to page 68 with the Hazardous Materials Emergency Preparedness Grant. This grant also funds security, I guess, for transportation, pipeline, and hazardous material safety. This grant is also related or is addressed with our State Emergency Response Commission as well, looking at our regional emergency response teams and our bomb teams as well.
So I have a question on, well, on all of these, there is a statewide cost allocation component. Or it's listed. So when we're dealing with grant dollars, how does that, does that get paid or does it not get paid? And if it does get paid, does that take away grant dollars in order to pay that cost allocation?
I'm going to defer to my financial wizard, Ashley Paulsrud, who is the Grants and Finance Section Chief.
Mr. Chairman, you're going to get that mic on and closer.
You have to introduce
Pull
yourself.
the mic into. Thank you.
Close enough. Okay. Mr. Chairman, Ashley Paulsrud, Grants and Finance Section Chief. You are correct. We do have the opportunity to charge indirect costs or statewide cost allocation to our federal grants. However, that does take away from the amount that we're able to pass through to the local level.
Is it dollar for dollar? I mean, how does it work?
Our statewide cost allocation rate right now for the agency is at about 5% because we just don't have any real general fund expenses that we can claim. Most of our agency expenses are covered by federal grants, which aren't eligible to be covered under the cost allocation. So we do charge that 5% to our federal grants. That's taken right off the top, and then we're able to pass through whatever is left.
Go ahead.
Follow up on that, if I may, Mr. Chairman, does that, are there ever any restrictions or allowances for administrative costs on those grants that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, each grant is a little bit different. The bulk of our grants have a 5% max. Some of them have a 10% max that we're able to charge, but we are only charging the 5% that we're eligible for at the current moment.
So how come Kevin doesn't charge 10% when we can?
That you would have to ask him.
Mr. Chairman, that's a really good question, actually, because what we've done here in the statewide cost allocation, you'll note that we're using a revenue code SWCA. That is not a real revenue source. It is not being taken away from the federal funds. It is a target that we've established for the agencies with them when they do their indirect cost allocation negotiation. It's an arbitrated rate. Some, like the Department of Family Services, has a quarterly cost allocation. Others, like the Department of Health, have a 3-year cost allocation, and they go negotiate that rate every 3 years. In the case of the Department of Health or the Department of Transportation, if you establish a rate, let's say the rate's 10% or 5%, and through that period of time, it's a fiscal orientation or it's a 3-year orientation, depending on your arbitrated agreement. If you overbill that amount, then the following 3-year period, you lower your rate. If you're underbilled that amount, then you negotiate a higher and you can recover that. So that it's a fair process through time with the federal government. The point of us going to the extent that we have on a statewide cost allocation is to establish with the agencies, and we've already returned a significant amount of money on this conversation with one agency because they looked at it and said, hey, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, let's go after it. The intent is to establish the information that's necessary for the agency to understand that the state of Wyoming has administrative costs, the state auditor, the state treasurer's office, the state budget department. This is a target established that says, not only can you charge your administrative rate that you have for your agency or those administrative costs for your agency, here's a target of the allowable costs that we've established for the statewide cost allocation, which is an agreement with the Fed, which is done annually. And they have to approve all the sources, the methods, and targets. So I won't get into that level of detail. But in this case, what we've done is we've established a target, that statewide cost allocation, when we use that revenue source, is a target. And it's really important now because we've got a lot of federal money coming in, and you can make choices of whether or not you use that administrative rate, IJA, ARPA, formula money. And if you overbill, then you can expose yourself to having to pay it back. Or if you underbill, you know, it's not in the best interest of us on all those other dollars that are out there that are coming at us. So we want to make sure that we collaborate with the agencies to give them what the statewide cost allocation for the state's administrative cost target is. Now, there's other cases in here where you're going to see the 300 series. That's the statewide cost allocation, where it's special revenue related. It might be state parks. For example, state parks had cultural resources. They've already got an indirect cost rate for cultural resources, but unfortunately the state budget department hadn't calculated properly the allocation to their special revenues, and we have done so. Just want to say that, you know, this was a real project. It wasn't simple. We spent lots and lots of time on it, but our mission is a clear, safe, ideal that this is what is allowable. Let's see what we can do to maximize that for the best interest of everybody.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to page 70, which is the WIP unit, and it's the transport of transuranic waste to the waste isolation pilot plant. This grant supports the tracking and preparedness activities that go on it supports one FTE for us with the transportation of these low-level radioactive materials that move through our state on a regular basis, headed to New Mexico. It also supports our program where we recalibrate radioactive detection equipment for the highway patrol and for local emergency management folks, and also YDOT at the ports. Questions about that?
Go ahead.
Okay, page
One
7.
second. We had a question from Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at the trend, Director, could you please help me understand some of the major reasons for the increase from, say, 21, 22 to what we're projecting for the current biennium that we're talking about, please?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, I believe that the funding moved from one entity to another. It moved from the Western Governors Association to the Western Interstate Energy Board, which allowed us to be able to ask for additional funding. I think that's the majority of the change in it and allows us to fund that position and the equipment.
Okay.
Page 72, our disaster contingency fund. This fund is used to support local jurisdictions in time of need with state resources. It does not go directly to the local jurisdiction, but allows us to be able to support them. it is used, you know, for different things. For instance, over the last year, we've purchased sandbags. We've provided National Guard support to the local level in the form of support for the Lingle Canal collapse, Medevac support standby for the Jim Lake fire, local resource deployment during the winter storms that we had with a Hagland vehicle to the Rollins area to help transport folks, different things like that. So again, it doesn't go directly to the local jurisdiction. It pays for us to be able to provide state resources to support that local jurisdiction.
And so typically, Don, is there there is a biennial number I know, I think statutorily, you can keep up to $500,000 in that carries over. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's 475,000. This $1, I am interpreting it as a placeholder. We won't actually put $1 in the budget, but rather the agency in this case is requesting a Section 303, which is the ability to carry over any unexpended funds. We did look that up this morning, and I believe there's approximately $200,000 that is unexpended this morning. So they're asking to be allowed to use that for the next period of 2 years.
Mr. Chairman,
So the balance of the report, there's 1.3, so that's got
It's-
expended since then.
this morning is actually 1.263966. So again,
what's-
yes, this is not part of our standard budget. This is something that we do have to request with each budget cycle. And again, we're just asking for this money to be carried over into the next biennium. So there's no additional funding request here.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm looking at the statute that I think it's up to 500,000 that can be carried over, but to do more than that, you have to have an exception, have us do it. Is that fair, Don or Kevin?
Mr. Chairman, the conservative approach is absolutely have you in the conversation and have that in the Section 300.
Okay. And so that's already being drafted and we'll see that in January. Is that correct?
I'd be happy to draft that for you.
Yeah, please do, or Don will. You guys decide. Okay.
And you
All
can cut to $1.
Well, that's, no, we're going to put that towards the cost allocation.
Okay, it's a good idea.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, moving on to page 76, which is the search and rescue unit. This is a pass-through fund. We are charged statutorily with assisting the Wyoming Search and Rescue Council in management of this fund. This is the fund is funded through hunting and fishing licenses and snowmobile permits, off-road vehicle permits, as well as the ability to receive direct donations from individuals. The Search and Rescue Council meets twice a year to evaluate funding reimbursement requests for counties that have had searches in their area, so that those things can be taken care of through this fund and reimbursed to the county. It also pays for training and some equipment loss as well, per the council's, discretion.
Okay. Any questions? Please proceed.
Okay.
Go ahead. Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director Bud. Searches are becoming more expensive every year, and there are more folks needing search and rescue services based on more extreme sports and activities that are taking place that are not necessarily covered through hunting and fishing licenses, type activities that help fund these. What ideas or proposals or would you or your office have to try and get more funding available for search and rescue to go to the council to be able to reimburse these communities when they do the searches?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, there's been a lot of conversation within the council as to different strategies that we might employ to continue to raise funds. I will let you know that there is a rule in place that does not allow that fund to go below $400,000. We currently have about $1.3 million in that account as well. the cost, the major cost that happens with search and rescues is helicopters. If we are able to get a federal mission, that cost is paid at the federal level. So if it's, we get a request from the local level for support, for air support, whether it's helicopters or fixed wing, we go through the Joint Operations Center at the National Guard and through the Air Force, the AFRCC, the Air Force Readiness Center, Response Center in Florida, believe it or not, where all signals go to. If you have a down plane or a personal locator beacon go off, that signal goes to that particular facility. If we ask them for support of the mission, then the mission will be paid for through that particular entity. So there is an option to utilize aircraft that are not paid for by the state or by the county. Those things are limited, though. They cannot be used for a suicidal person or for any type of law enforcement situation where you may be searching. It's strictly for search and rescue type events. They also cannot be used for body recovery. So that's where you get into additional costs sometimes where that if a search starts in earnest to look for that person, and when the person is found and they're deceased, it's still covered by the mission. It's only if you know that that person is already deceased and you're doing just the recovery of the body, that's not covered by that particular mission. There have been a lot of conversation with regard to adding a surcharge on activities in some way, shape, or form. There are different states that have a membership card that they pay into for search and rescue that gives the impression that they will be rescued no matter what, which doesn't necessarily, it's kind of a false impression, in my opinion. We have some work that we can do on also encouraging additional donations to the Search and Rescue Fund. I think that's also a possibility to do more work there. But again, there's been some conversations about maybe a tax on rental vehicles or something like that, something that would illustrate the fact that we have people coming to our state to recreate and that the cost of rescuing them might be built in somewhere.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, page 80 is our state support fund. Being so heavily funded by federal grants, we are limited on our expenditures as to what we can pay for with those grants because they have parameters. This fund is used to pay for things in our office that are not allowable under grant funds, which includes response. And it also supports the activation of the regional emergency response teams as well as the bomb teams throughout our state. So those teams are made up of local individuals and when activated by our office, become a state entity and for indemnification and reimbursement purposes. So that. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, and the page 82 is just a unit that is set aside for us to be able to track the matching funds for the EMPG grant that are non-cash. We utilize our building and other things as in-kind match so that we can get those federal funds. So this is just a tracking of those non-cash matching funds. Questions? Okay, moving on to page 86, the Emergency Response Fund. You may recall that we asked for an increase in this charge per package last session, I believe, or 2 sessions, I can't remember, to bring it up to inflationary rates. So this fund also helps us with the response for radiological incidents, as well as training and detection, all of that, calibration of the equipment. And it does support one FTE who also is the liaison to the State Emergency Response Commission and manages the regional response teams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Budd, as I'm looking through, I was just curious for your comments on that inflationary adjustment we made to those permits. As you've looked around, or there may be some pretty significant differences in what Wyoming charges versus what other states charge. I'm seeing on the average around $2,500 for what other states do for the high radioactive. As I read the statutes, just trying to make sure that it aligned, and then low level radiation would be something else. And so when you requested an update, there's one that I think Nebraska's 3,100.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, yes, when we asked for the increase, we only applied an inflationary figure on that from when it was created in 1989. We did not ask for any additional funding, but yes, we did do a study to make sure that we were in line with other states, and it is quite low compared to other states.
So we're not in line.
No, sir.
Okay.
So just to follow up on that, would you put that together for us? So
Yes.
because we can maybe put you in line.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions with regard to that fund?
And so we'll need that by what?
Pardon me?
By late January.
Okay. No problem. Okay, the next unit that we have is on page 90, which is BRIC, which is a newish federal grant that was formed out of a previous federal grant. This is the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Grant. This is on sort of the mitigation side of our mission, where we try to fund projects that will reduce the consequences of natural disasters in communities. And this one in particular also has it's a nationally competitive grant, but it also has a state set aside. This year, the state set aside is $2 million. Of that $2 million, we have to spend $1.5 million of that money on design, essentially project design. And there's also another requirement that we spend $400,000 of that money in a newly designated zone, which is a community disaster resilience zone designated by FEMA. This effort was to try and make sure that money across the nation was put into communities that have the highest need. However, our defined community disaster resilience zone in Wyoming is a census tract within Lincoln County, which is fine, except for 97% of that census tract is federal land, which you cannot use federal money on federal land. So we're working through trying to see if we can do a project to help them in that area in coordination with the Forest Service, but it's going to be a challenge. There is also the opportunity for us to receive an additional $2 million for what they are calling a building code plus up. That $400,000 can also be spent in that area as well. We are working and we're having conversations. The Fire Marshal's office is very interested in taking a look at that and looking at projects to do in coordination with our office to try and get that additional funding.
Please go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, what is the difference between a hard or a soft match?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, hard match is actual cash, so that would be general fund money that you all would appropriate. Soft match is a service that's provided on behalf of us. So for instance, our building that we're currently in is owned by the National Guard, and they don't charge us rent. So they're essentially providing a home for us. That service can be used as a soft match.
So, Lynn, as we go through each of these, what we see is dollars here, dollars there. And when you stack them all up, it turns into quite a bit of money. But you're also asking for 2 million more in your budget request. I think what we need is an overall snapshot of the money that comes in, how they dovetail together. I mean, because a resilient infrastructure sounds exactly part of what you would do in your cyber and infrastructure relief research. So they all dovetail together. So we just need to know all the dollars you receive now are eligible for, and in order to determine, well, not only that, you need 2 million more for this and this and this. So we need to know what total allocations are and expenditures and dollars that are available so that we can say, okay, this is, for us to make an educated decision on a budget request asking for more dollars. So it's not complicated. We just need to understand everything that's available to you. And all those grants, I presume you need to, like this one, you need to expend it. It's part of an ongoing duty. If you don't spend it, you don't get it, right?
Correct.
And so we also need to know if you've been spending these dollars for the past 10 years, what have you been doing? And so theoretically, you've already got a bunch of work done that would be part of cyber and infrastructure, security, safety, and education. So once again, we just need to see the whole picture to understand all that kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, I'll get to that request because the $2 million request is coming up shortly and it is completely focused on one program. So we'll be
Okay.
able to do that and we'll be able to pull that together for you as well. Happy to do that.
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, because that's would help me too, is in the years where you have expended and what kind of projects in each category. So that way that'll, give us an illustration of what we can what each pot's going to look like going forward and what we need it for. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Grew, I will add that a lot of these funds are pass-through funds to the local level. So if there isn't a project at the local level, we can't spend the funds. Just as a bit of information there.
But
And we'll be happy to put
yeah,
together a
but
whole.
if the funds are passed through to the local level,
Mhm.
that's essentially what you would be doing with some of the other funds and for,
Mhm.
when you talked about it, the federal, teams with local, county and putting together plans and education and all that kind of stuff. So they all dovetail, but
Mhm.
that's when we just need to understand it.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Happy to put that together for you. Okay, and to the area that we were just talking about, page 93 starts the Homeland Security Grant Program. This is actually a unit that carries 3 different grants in it. The first one we've talked a lot about, the State Homeland Security Grant. That one this is 100% federal funding. Does have a focus on a terrorism nexus. We must have a terrorism nexus in order to use these funds. We are required to pass through 80% of this grant to the local level. So we're allowed to keep 20% at the state level. In addition, we're also required to spend 35% of this grant on law enforcement type activities. Any general questions about that one at all?
Well, I'm looking at page 94, revenue, federal funds. So on the HSGP, we received 14 million in 21-22, is that right? And 11.4 million in 23-24 and 11.4 in 25-26?
That's for all 3 of the grants, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, but that's the total amount received.
Total amount received, yeah, yes.
So, but you add all those up for the total amount received.
Yes, sir.
So all of that would fit into the big picture that you're going to show us, right?
Yes, sir. Okay, another portion of this unit is the nonprofit security grant program. Those grants all have to go to a 501c3 type organization, normally churches and other
Ski
nonprofit.
patrol, things like that? Or?
No, not ski patrol. And then the one where we're going to be asking for additional funding or have asked for additional funding from the general fund is the state and local cybersecurity grant program that starts at the bottom of page 93 and has some great detail on page 94. This grant is a is different. It does come through the same funding source through the Department of Homeland Security, but this was a part of the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. It supports the implementation of cybersecurity projects. It is fully funded for these 4 cycles, so it isn't as volatile as the regular Homeland Security grant program in that has to be reauthorized on an annual basis. Each of these grant years, so let's for instance start with FY22, that grant lives for 4 years. So the projects that we put in there can take 4 years to complete if needed, just for your reference. That first year, there was a 10% match required. We did request a waiver because the grant came out after budgets were already done at the state level, and we did receive that waiver. So we did not have to provide that 10% match. This grant also requires that 80% of the funding or services get passed through to the local level. So services can be provided by the state on behalf of the local level. And that's what the planning committee that I spoke about earlier has decided to do with this first year with the $2.2 million is to provide state services to the local level. It's an opt-in program. And if I get too far down this road, I'm going to turn around to my friend TR and let him explain what that exactly means. But it's a good thing for the local level. And then the FY23 grant, which the changes in numbers you may see is that when we put the budget book together, the estimate for us to receive was 4.2 million. We actually received that grant or had that grant obligated to us recently, and we received 4.477 270. That does increase the match request on that. So we have an option, and we have essentially asked for the $2 million that we've asked for, or actually it would be 3, depending, and I'll explain more, would be if the state provided all of the match. So we have an opportunity to allow direct applications from the local level for projects that they may want to do. In that case, the local level would provide the match. So that 20, 30, or 40% match, that would have to be done at the local level rather
It's a
than
little
this.
harder each time.
Pardon me? Yes, it does. Yes, sir. Yeah. So the reason why we asked for all of the matching funds was number one, we have an application in for the IIJA matching funds for the FY23 grant, because that was the only one that would fit within the parameter of that fund, because it would be over prior to us being able to apply that to the other grants. So that funding is ending in 25, 26. Yeah.
Senator Grew.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lynn?
Yeah.
And I may have you
may
phone a
need the
friend
whole
on this.
team here.
TR, actually, this question's for you, so I will ask you, just so I make sure I got this right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is this, you and I were talking about your ETS budget, and we're talking about programs, cybersecurity programs for local communities. This is the program you were speaking of, correct?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, TR Sheehan, Interim Director for ETS. Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, this would be in part. So this particular grant.
Might want to bring that a little closer.
For this particular grant, what we're trying to do is find low-hanging fruit that would be the most beneficial to local governments. And so what we have identified are 2 potential options here. One is what we call endpoint detection and response. So think of it as your antivirus, but it does a lot more than that. So our local governments have a hard time funding some of these tools just because they get pretty expensive. And so this grant would allow the state to go in. If the local government would like to opt in, we can provide those licenses at no cost. The other thing that we're potentially looking at out of this first funding round is, cybersecurity starts with us, people. And so we want to find opportunities to provide that training opportunity for local government staff as well, so they can have the standard routine cybersecurity training that all the state employees enjoy. We could then also offer that to local government as well.
So, one follow-up.
Sure.
So So at the end of the day, what we're shooting for with the combination of the state funds and these matching funds is that then local governments as well as our state departments are all going to be working more or less on a unified system that we all are, that through your agency and Homeland Security, that can provide this for a lot of smaller communities, especially that may have a hard time having their own, or situation where a lot of communities are out shopping for their own systems and we've got 20 different systems out there. We're trying to avoid that, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Groot, that is correct. So I think one of the big benefits of trying to go down this path, especially with this grant opportunity, is state buying power. So the one solution we are looking at, I think the approximate cost for that license is $46, and I'm ballparking here, but it's pretty close to $46. If that local community were to go buy that today, they'd pay $60 per license right off the bat. So we do see that state buying power come in and reduce cost as well.
Thank you.
Senator Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, Director Budd and Director Sheehan wanted a question to understand when the local community has to pony up the match and when it does not have to. So if your local IT department wants to beef up its firewall, if it applies directly to the federal government, it has to provide the match. But if it has you ask on its behalf, then it pays zero, or how does it?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff, the local entity never applies directly to the federal government. In order to access the federal funds, there has to be match provided. So if we are doing the projects that we're talking about with a state service being provided, we would, as the state, would supply that match. If we have applications open up similar to our other Homeland Security grant, where a local jurisdiction would apply to us to have their project funded, the planning committee would evaluate all those projects. The local jurisdiction then would likely be responsible for that match, unless you all want to provide it at the state. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So, Kevin, it would seem to me that some of those, well, the question is, can you use other federal dollars too? So you can't use ARPA dollars?
No, sir.
That was my question. So can we substitute ARPA dollars for it?
Mr. Chairman, there's a process that we'd have to go through for the application of the ARPA direct money, because that's what we have left, would be the ARPA direct. And I'm just going to be real quick. ARPA direct has all the federal entanglements that you have to go through to be a qualified census tract or disparate income situation. There may be a small amount of ARPA revenue placement. Remember, ARPA revenue replacement is just basically general funds. And
That's
when I
right.
mean small, I'm not anticipating any, but when we finish the biennium, those ARPA revenue replacement dollars reside largely, like you heard the governor say today, in the Department of Corrections and the Department of Health. $323 million was appropriated, which now we have converted back to general funds.
So just to follow up on that, if there happens to be $202 million in revenue replacement dollars at the end of the biennium, we could use that if we appropriate for this and said that's the first line of dollars.
Mr. Chairman, that is unlikely, but the fact remains that ARPA revenue replacement dollars are general funds, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Wait, one sec. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Erica Legursky, Policy Advisor for Governor Gordon. Just also wanted to mention, as you're talking about that, so the federal funds for this particular grant can't be matched with federal funds, but they do have an application in for the IIJA matching funds. We were only going to be able to fund a portion of that, though, just because of the timing of those IIJA matching funds and when those end, if you will, which was why there's a separate request in here. So they do have some. We are trying to get some of those IIJA matching funds. I just wanted to make sure you were.
So then to go back to, if we don't fund it, then you put it in for an application for to waive it, correct? For each year?
Mr. Chairman, we did put in an application for waiver of that matching funds for FY23 and we were denied.
Okay.
And one other point with regard to the fund established by the legislature is the requirement for the 4-to-1. And as the match increases for the grants, FY '24 and FY '25 would not be eligible because they do not meet that 4-to-1 requirement.
I'm looking at the total amount of federal funds. That looks like more than 4-to-1. That's what I don't, because it says 40%, like 30% for FY 2024, and yet the total amount of proceeds is 11 million versus.
It's per, Mr. Chairman, it's per grant. So the FY '24 grant is 3.1 estimated federal funds. And so we're required to provide that 30% match, which then would not meet the 4-to-1
So
criteria.
I'm sorry to interrupt. When is the due date for those to pay that 30 and 40%? Or 20, 30, 40?
It would be during the performance period of the grant. So 2024 is a 4-year grant. And it begins in October of 24.
So
And
we
then,
have through 28.
yes,
And 2025, we have through 2029.
correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Ken.
just a thought. Through the conversation with ARPA Direct, we would like to position the state of Wyoming to streamline the funding that remain when they're identified. It's going to be critical for us to be able to do that. And there's a list of things that we believe that could be qualified that we wouldn't have to necessarily butt ourselves up against the federal rules. But the idea of what we have now on unobligated or what remains in the ARPA, because there is about $630,000 that remain in ARPA Direct, is to find a way to streamline that so we can be successful with the obligation of those funds by December of 2024.
So Kevin, I think what we would like to see is what that is and have a presentation to us before the budget session so that we have input on how and where that goes.
And I believe that that is a planned event from our side of the fence.
And yeah, and that would include all other reversions and all that kind of stuff. Rennie has been keeping us up to date. So sooner rather than later.
I agree, and I express that because a lot of the ARPA stuff, we are going through the process of trying to get qualified, and we're even in the grants management conversation, we want to bring some more expertise in to make this more successful with our grant writing, and then be able to identify where we were successful, where we fell short, those kind of things in the world. But there's an expressed need for us to streamline this process because we won't get another bite at the apple for another session because this session dictates what we can do prior to December 31st of 2024.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Senator Greer.
Thank you. Yeah. As Director Budd, I think, yeah, because it seems like at this point, the most important thing would be to collate where all these programs are and then maybe figure out a plan that how we could leverage general fund dollars where matches are needed, all with a bottom line of trying to get this money out and get this money deployed, make sure that we make those ARPA deadlines, but also make sure the local communities that could qualify know that it even exists and not have to have, so they run into walls when they say, well, you qualify for this, but not this, or, if you had this, you could do it. So we could have that. And I guess that's what the good director means when he talks streamline, is that. But that seemed like it's going to be the important part of trying to get this out.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And we have been working diligently, the ARPA team, which includes the State Budget Department, Governor's Office, and agencies. We've been working diligently to facilitate the needs of the local governments. The conversations that we have are not limited to simply the state of Wyoming. And we have weekly meetings and we have monthly meetings on ARPA, ARPA topics in general, strengthening requests, finding needs. And then also one of the most critical things that we were working on is the area of where we believe is the most critical exposure that we have, and that is subrecipient awards and subrecipient grant monitoring with the local governments. We're doing all those things, and you're absolutely right. What we want to do at this stage of the ballgame is figure a way that we can collaborate to streamline the final answer for ARPA.
One last follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Please, go ahead.
Not to open a big can of worms here, but when you say local jurisdiction, how far down are we going? Are we talking about, we're talking about cities and towns, but also, you know, rural electric cooperatives, water districts, that, because that's the critical infrastructure that we're talking about in a lot of cases.
Everybody is welcome. And in fact, Senator Drew, you asked this question in the interim meeting about this, and I invited everybody that's listening to just contact the state budget department, contact the governor's office. We will get you into these conversations. There's a need for us to collaborate. And that's one of the strongest intents of the grant management aspect of this is the grant management is to bring the strength that we have wherever we have it, and also bring that to the local governments and hand that off so that we can start being more successful with grants. I believe that the federal government is going to be more in tune to be picking and choosing where money flows. We've got to strengthen our positions so that we get chose.
Okay, go ahead.
There we go. Okay, at the bottom of page 95 or on page 95, you'll see the start of the next two exception requests. This reclassification of the current position that we have in critical infrastructure and cybersecurity, that position is paid for 100% through the State Homeland Security Grant, which is a 100% federal grant. We requested a reclassification of this position in order to attract a qualified person. We moved from a 9 to a 10. That reclassification was approved by HRD, and now we're just asking for the additional spending authority only for to pay this position at the current rate they're being paid.
Okay, go ahead.
Priority number 4, again, is the state and local cybersecurity grant match, which we've talked about already.
Okay.
Yep.
Any questions on that? Go ahead.
Okay, we move to page 100, and that's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. This is a grant that we receive based on disasters that occur in the state. So if we get a federally declared disaster, we get hazard mitigation funding obligated that would allow for us, again, to reduce the consequences of those disasters at the local level. We also receive this funding when we get when forestry gets an FMAG declaration of Fire Management Assistance Grant. That's direct funding to help them fight the fire. And then in turn, we get we manage the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program for that money. Any questions there? I think that's the end. That concludes our presentation.
Any other questions for Lynn? Come on, more questions.
It's okay, it's okay.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would.
Madam Anderson, hold on.
Find the page here. It was, there was a revenue piece in there, the section on revenue at the bottom of we're talking about the matching the cybersecurity. Over the last 3 years, about 35.5 million, but it shows like 11.4 million for 25-26. Let me find it.
I'm sorry, Representative Henderson.
It's on the page 90 at the bottom.
Page 90.
It's the revenue code 7343. I don't have any idea what that is, but revenue caught my eye. Is there really a revenue piece there, Mr. Chairman? Page 90 at the bottom, Part B, revenue.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, that is just the grant itself coming in,
Just the grant itself, it's
Yeah.
not real revenue.
not real revenue.
Okay.
Pretend
Well, it's a
revenue.
soft revenue. It's
Soft revenue, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, now you're really done.
Yeah, oh, thank you, sir. Do you have a deadline for when you would like that report with regard to our funding, the whole
What time?
summary of it?
Sometime before we
Before
have
session.
callbacks
Okay.
in January.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I mean, we need to do it before we sit down and go through your budget requests or your exception requests. That's what we need. That help? Okay,
Sure does. Thank you.
okay. Okay, up next is Jenny. Come on up. Welcome.
So good morning, Madam Co-Chairwoman and members of the committee. My name is Jenny Gordon. I'm the First Lady of Wyoming and a proud First Lady and humbled to serve the state of Wyoming. Just today, I was able to read to some students at one of our local schools, and that's just a joy for me to participate in those kind of events, along with the other work that I do. I come before you today to present the governor's residence budget for the 2023-2024 biennium. And if it's the pleasure of the committee, I will speak to the budget proposed.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So the agency overview is just the residence operates with a biennial budget of $650,434 with 2 authorized full-time staff. The governor's residence includes both the private and public use areas. A little background, the governor's residence provides both the site and building to be used exclusively for the residence of the governor during his time in office, and the public use area serve to provide the setting for special events hosted by the governor and the first spouse. The governor's residence operates with one division, the residence operations. The division provides funding for essential operations of the residence. Another division for China and food service repair or replacement, although this was eliminated through the past budget reductions. And agency challenges, the most significant challenge for the resident is adequate funding in order to continue to meet the high standards the public would expect of a governor's residence. Our residence operation, again, is a $650,434. We do have our 100 series budget, which is a personal services budget of $471,708. The 200 series, which is our supportive services, is $69,628. Our 400 series, which is our data services, is $7,769. And our 900 series, which is our contractual services, is $101,329. This includes our servers, housekeepers, carpet cleaning, and things of that like. There is an exception request on this budget. It is for a salary increase of $19,390 to support the reclassification and realignment of the chief of staff position for the residents. This position evolved from an administrative position to a chief of staff position. The prior administration had contracted with vendors to provide additional duties, and the administrative position did not perform. After reclassification, the chief of staff position is responsible for all contract positions and the executive chef position. This position was reclassified to reflect the true duties of the position, and the pay adjustment was a result from that reclassification. With that being said, I am open to any questions that you all might have.
Understood.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Gordon, thank you very much. I had a question about the difference between the base budget and the standard budget on page 3 under the Series 100 for personnel. And it's my understanding the base budget is essentially what we had in the prior biennium, and the standard budget is what's baked in for the current, or the 25-26 biennium. Under personnel, the payroll costs essentially go from $334,000 in the biennium to $471,000 for this next biennium. So that's an increase of $137,000 baked into the standard budget, right? That's a 40% increase or so, which is.
Kevin, do you want to grab that question?
Mr. Chairman, I'd be pleased to do so. This is the compensation adjustment that you approved, and it was put in place by A&I through the rule set that A&I has, and this is the funding that we adjusted in the standard budget, but it's driven by the compensation adjustments.
And so,
So that would suggest that whoever was working there was doing it for the pleasure of working there. That's what it tells me.
so, yeah, so Mr. Chairman, my first question, I assume that the two full-time staff there, they probably work, I guess, odd hours and long hours, I would imagine. They probably have to work weekends, nights, things like that. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, they are salaried. Let me put on my glasses here. You all may be familiar with this particular look. My husband will exhibit.
And
Yes,
Ms. Gordon, I take it you,
I think those are his glasses.
they are his glasses.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Gordon, I take it you are not personally involved in deciding the particular pay bump from the last biennium to the next biennium. Rather, that's something that was determined by our formula under what's called market policy position. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, once the reclassification was determined, then it went to the A&I folks, and then I was just simply given the.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, against that background, so these are pretty substantial raises, probably well-deserved, probably make sense, but they're pretty substantial, right? Because at $137,000 in 2 years, that's $68,000 in a year. If you divide that between two people, that's $34,000 of extra payroll cost per employee. Average actual pay increase of $22,000, say, roughly $20,000. So that's a pretty big pay bump. It's, you know, as far as agencies goes, that's the largest across the enterprise. So then why the exception request for another $19,000, another 10 grand a year?
Representative Nicholas, Chairman Nicholas, Madam Co-Chair, Representative Stiff, what this relates to is that there was a reclass that was done on the Chief of Staff. That reclass is sent down to HRD. So what happens is we look at the duties and we figure out where they lie. So in other words, the person in that position was underpaid for 3 years on the duties that they were doing. So we reallocated that person to where they should be, which is an EXMTO 1. So it's the very beginning class of the EX level. Crosswalks to a 12. That might help a little bit. So that position was evaluated by A&I. The person in that position, the director or the first lady, does not really have a say on how that comes out. So what we do is look at it. So what happened was when we reclassed that in May, that position had a bump in a reclass. That's where the $19,000 comes from. That reclass was at the minimum pay table for the year prior. So say, for example, that's at a $6,800, say, for a month. And then when the second compensation adjustment came in, the determination was that nobody would be below 90% of MPP, if you remember that. So we went from 80 to 90. So it was a significant jump in July when that person or that position jumped up to the 90% of the new pay table. That is why the jump seems so big. I would say that when you say cut it in half and give each of them that's not really how that was determined. But because of the reclass happening prior to the market adjustment, the comp adjustment paid for part of it. The residents has to pay for the 19 for the reclass. So that's the difference. Is that helpful?
Mr. Chairman, yes, Director Bach. So when you say chief of staff, it makes me think you have a person supervising a bunch of other people. And we have 2 full-time equivalent employees in the governor's residence, right?
Chairman Nicholas, Representative Stith, there are two employees. There's a chief of staff and then there is the chef. There are also personal services. If you go back to the prior administration, many of the duties that the chief of staff for the residence is doing now was done by personal services. So if you look at the 900 series, it's $60,000 less than it was under the prior administration, essentially transferred over to the 100 series to have an employee there. So there are two folks, but they also, the chief of staff manages all the day-to-day out at the residence. For example, there is an A&I employee that works out at the residence. We don't really supervise that employee, the chief of staff does. So even though it's not on paper, there are other employees that are out there.
Groundskeeping, housekeepers,
Correct.
service staff for events, all that type of stuff.
Correct. If that helps.
Thank you.
And it does, and just so I could say, it does set up the next administration for a proper employees in the residence. I think this is the proper way to go forward. And I think it does set up the next governor and the spouse to have a good working
Or husband.
residence. Pardon me?
Or husband.
That's why I said spouse. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jenny, you mentioned the China replacement and silverware replacement. I know we reduced that a couple of years ago. Are there needs? And I ask this because I think it's important that we have a positive image in the residents there. And so if there are needs, I'd love to know about them. And if we need to add some funding, it would be good to know so that positive, professional, outstanding view of Wyoming is portrayed through the governor's residence.
Well, and I had the same question. Did we decide not to do the silverware because of the COVID or because of cuts?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it was added back in now that I think about it, and I think my notes were a little stale. So I think there has been some added back in that you added in the last time.
What about all those glasses that I break whenever I show up?
Absolutely. If you were looking to add to the residents, I believe the food budget would be maybe where I would look. Food costs have gone up 40% in, our world. And so I think if that's something that you're looking for to continue to do the great service that we do as, the governor's residents to really present ourselves well, I think that's, if I was looking, that's what I would do. But I'm also Scottish, so we'll work with what we have.
Don, did you get that? Did you just make a note for that when budget comes up? Go ahead, Lloyd.
Thank
Don,
you,
hold on.
Mr. Chairman, it sounded like there was a question as to the historical budgets here. And so a decade ago in 13-14, this agency had a budget of $694,000. For the most current biennium, it was $518,000. The FTEs assigned to this have also been modified a decade ago, 3 full-time, 1 part-time, and currently, as the budget indicates, 2 full-time.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Jenny, I'd like to, first off, say Merry Christmas and second, really think you're probably the best ambassador for the state we have, and thank you for who you are, and know that you do whatever it takes when you're hosting the governor's office, and you make it just fine. But now that you've been there and you understand the building and you understand the functionality of it, and you understand what is required, because we have this conversation, what do we need to do? If you was to rate Wyoming Governor's Mansion in functionality and how it all works together, 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, give it a number.
Wow.
Well, and the reason I ask that is we're looking for guidance, and we have faith in your opinion. You're very conservative, and
I can help you. I'd say about a 2.
Well,
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Larson. It can be a challenge to entertain in the small space that we have. I think that may be the most limiting thing. But what we do have is people in Wyoming want to see a residence that resembles what they would expect in our state. So it may be a little bit more humble than other residences, but I think it really shows the true Wyoming that we expect to see. If I was going to rate it, I would say our staff is an 11. I would say the building itself is very nice, but I think it is a little bit small. So if I had to rate that, I would probably say a 7.
Thank you.
How many golf balls do you find in your front yard? Back there.
Thank you, Chairman. We do that by weight, not by number, because it's so large.
Okay, further questions? All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for your service and thank you.
Kevin, anything else before lunch?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to let you know that when you get the inflation letter, you'll note that the governor's residence, we've adjusted the food allowance by $14,903.
That's one dinner.
For you, Mr. Chairman. For me, it's a lifetime.
Okay. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Okay, any business before we adjourn for lunch, Don? So we're right on time, right on schedule. So we'll regroup at 1 o'clock?